Chapter 11, Hermione's Helping Hand. As Hermione had predicted, the 6 years' free periods were not the hours of blissful relaxation Ron had anticipated, but times in which to attempt to keep up with the vast amount of homework they were being set. Not only were they studying as though they had exams every day, but the lessons themselves had become more demanding than ever before. Harry barely understood half of what Professor McGonagall said to them these days. Even Hermione had had to ask her to repeat instructions once or twice. Incredibly, and to Hermione's increasing resentment, Harry's best subject had suddenly become potions, thanks to the Half-Blood Prince. Non-verbal spells were now expected, not only in defense against the dark arts, but in charms and transfiguration too. Harry frequently looked over at his classmates in the common room, or at mealtimes to see them purple in the face and straining as though they had overdosed on you-know-poo, but he knew that they were really struggling to make spells work without saying incantations aloud. It was a relief to get outside into the greenhouses. They were dealing with more dangerous plants than ever in herbology, but at least they were still allowed to swear loudly if the venomous tentacula seized them unexpectedly from behind. One result of their enormous workload and the frantic hours of practicing non-verbal spells was that Harry, Ron, and Hermione had so far been unable to find time to go and visit Hagrid. He had stopped coming to meals at the staff table, an ominous sign, and on the few occasions when they had passed him in the corridors or out in the grounds, he had mysteriously failed to notice them or hear their greetings. "We've got to go and explain," said Hermione, looking up at Hagrid's huge empty chair at the staff table the following Saturday at breakfast. "We've got Quidditch tryouts this morning," said Ron. "And we're supposed to be practicing that Aguamenti charm from Flitwick. Anyway, explain what? How are we going to tell him we hated his stupid subject?" "We didn't hate it," said Hermione. "Speak for yourself. I haven't forgotten the Scroots," said Ron darkly. "And I'm telling you now, we've had a narrow escape. You didn't hear him going on about his gormless brother. We'd have been teaching Grawp how to tie his shoelaces if we'd stayed." "I hate not talking to Hagrid," said Hermione, looking upset. "We'll go down after Quidditch," Harry assured her. He too was missing Hagrid, although like Ron he thought that they were better off without Grawp in their lives. But trials might take all morning, the number of people who have applied. He felt slightly nervous at confronting the first hurdle of his captaincy. "I dunno why the team's this popular all of a sudden." "Oh, come on, Harry," said Hermione, suddenly impatient. "It's not Quidditch that's popular, it's you. You've never been more interesting, and frankly, you've never been more fanciable." Ron gagged on a large piece of kipper. Hermione spared him one look of disdain, before turning back to Harry. "Everyone knows you've been telling the truth now, don't they? The whole wizarding world has had to admit that you were right about Voldemort being back, and that you really have fought him twice in the last 2 years, and escaped both times. And now they're calling you the Chosen One. Well, come on, can't you see why people are fascinated by you?" Harry was finding the Great Hall very hot all of a sudden, even though the ceiling still looked cold and rainy. "And you've been through all that persecution from the Ministry, when they were trying to make out you were unstable and a liar. You can still see the marks on the back of your hand where that evil woman made you write with your own blood, but you stuck to your story anyway. You can still see where those brains got hold of me in the Ministry, look," said Ron, shaking back his sleeves. "And it doesn't hurt that you've grown about a foot over the summer either," Hermione finished, ignoring Ron. "I'm tall," said Ron inconsequentially. The post owls arrived, swooping down through rain-flecked windows, scattering everyone with droplets of water. Most people were receiving more post than usual. Anxious parents were keen to hear from their children and to reassure them, in turn, that all was well at home. Harry had received no mail since the start of term. His only regular correspondent was now dead, and although he had hoped that Lupin might write occasionally, he had so far been disappointed. He was very surprised, therefore, to see the snowy white Hedwig circling amongst all the brown and grey owls. She landed in front of him carrying a large, square package. A moment later, an identical package landed in front of Ron, crushing beneath it his minuscule and exhausted owl, Pigwidgeon. "Ha," said Harry, unwrapping the parcel to reveal a new copy of Advanced Potion Making, fresh from Flourish and Blots. "Oh good," said Hermione, delighted. "Now you can give that graffitied copy back." "Are you mad?" said Harry. "I'm keeping it. Look, I've thought it out." He pulled the old copy of Advanced Potion Making out of his bag and tapped the cover with his wand, muttering, "Diffindo." The cover fell off. He did the same thing with the brand new book. Hermione looked scandalized. He then swapped the covers, tapped each, and said, "Reparo." There sat the prince's copy, disguised as a new book, and there sat the fresh copy from Flourish and Blots, looking thoroughly second-hand. "I'll give Slughorn back the new one, he can't complain, it cost 9 galleons." Hermione pressed her lips together, looking angry and disapproving, but was distracted by a third owl landing in front of her carrying that day's copy of the Daily Prophet. She unfolded it hastily and scanned the front page. "Anyone we know dead?" asked Ron in a determinedly casual voice. He posed the same question every time Hermione opened her paper. "No, but there have been more Dementor attacks," said Hermione. "And an arrest." "Excellent, who?" said Harry, thinking of Bellatrix Lestrange. "Stan Shunpike," said Hermione. "What?" said Harry, startled. "Stanley Shunpike, conductor on the popular Wizarding Convents the Night Bus, has been arrested on suspicion of Death Eater activity. Mr. Shunpike, 21, was taken into custody late last night, after a raid on his Clapham home." "Stan Shunpike, a Death Eater," said Harry, remembering the spotty youth he had first met 3 years before. "No way. He might have been put under the Imperious Curse," said Ron reasonably. "You never can tell." "It doesn't look like it," said Hermione, who was still reading. "It says here he was arrested after he was overheard talking about the Death Eater's secret plans in a pub." She looked up with a troubled expression on her face. "If he was under the Imperious Curse, he'd hardly stand around gossiping about their plans, would he? It sounds like he was trying to make out he knew more than he did," said Ron. "Isn't he the one who claimed he was going to become Minister of Magic, when he was trying to chat up those Veela?" "Yeah, that's him," said Harry. "I dunno what they are playing at, taking Stan seriously. They probably want to look as though they are doing something," said Hermione, frowning. "People are terrified, you know. The Pottle twins' parents want them to go home. And Eloise Midgen has already been withdrawn. Her father picked her up last night." "What?" said Ron, goggling at Hermione. "But Hogwarts is safer than their homes, bound to be. We've got auras, and all those extra protective spells, and we've got Dumbledore." "I don't think we've got him all the time," said Hermione very quietly, glancing toward the staff table over the top of the Prophet. "Haven't you noticed? His seat's been empty as often as Hagrid's this past week." Harry and Ron looked up at the staff table. The headmaster's chair was indeed empty. Now Harry came to think of it, he had not seen Dumbledore since their private lesson a week ago. "I think he's left the school to do something with the Order," said Hermione in a low voice. "I mean, it's all looking serious, isn't it?" Harry and Ron did not answer, but Harry knew that they were all thinking the same thing. There had been a horrible incident the day before, when Hannah Abbott had been taken out of herbology to be told her mother had been found dead. They had not seen Hannah since. When they left the Gryffindor table 5 minutes later to head down to the Quidditch pitch, they passed Lavender Brown and Parvati Patil. Remembering what Hermione had said about the Patil twins' parents wanting them to leave Hogwarts, Harry was unsurprised to see that the two best friends were whispering together, looking distressed. What did surprise him was that when Ron drew level with them, Parvati suddenly nudged Lavender, who looked around and gave Ron a wide smile. Ron blinked at her, then returned the smile uncertainly. His walk instantly became something more like a strut. Harry resisted the temptation to laugh, remembering that Ron had refrained from doing so after Malfoy had broken Harry's nose. Hermione, however, looked cold and distant all the way down to the stadium through the cool, misty drizzle, and departed to find a place in the stands without wishing Ron good luck. As Harry had expected, the trials took most of the morning. Half of Gryffindor House seemed to have turned up, from first years, who were nervously clutching a selection of the dreadful old-school brooms, to seventh years who towered over the rest, looking coolly intimidating. The latter included a large, wiry-haired boy Harry recognized immediately from the Hogwarts Express. "We met on the train, in old Slugg's compartment," he said confidently, stepping out of the crowd to shake Harry's hand. "Cormac McLaggen, keeper. You didn't try out last year, did you?" asked Harry, taking note of the breadth of McLaggen, and thinking that he would probably block all 3 goal hoops without even moving. "I was in the hospital wing when they held the trials," said McLaggen, with something of a swagger. "Ate a pound of doxy eggs for a bet." "Right," said Harry. "Well, if you wait over there." He pointed over to the edge of the pitch, close to where Hermione was sitting. He thought he saw a flicker of annoyance pass over McLaggen's face and wondered whether McLaggen expected preferential treatment, because they were both old Slugg's favorites. Harry decided to start with a basic test, asking all applicants for the team to divide into groups of 10 and fly once around the pitch. This was a good decision. The first 10 was made up of first years, and it could not have been plainer that they had hardly ever flown before. Only one boy managed to remain airborne for more than a few seconds, and he was so surprised he promptly crashed into one of the goal posts. The second group was comprised of 10 of the silliest girls Harry had ever encountered, who, when he blew his whistle, merely fell about giggling and clutching one another. Romilda Vane was amongst them. When he told them to leave the pitch, they did so quite cheerfully and went to sit in the stands to heckle everyone else. The third group had a pile-up halfway around the pitch. Most of the fourth group had come without broomsticks. The fifth group were Hufflepuffs. "If there's anyone else here who's not from Gryffindor," roared Harry, who was starting to get seriously annoyed, "leave now, please." There was a pause, then a couple of little Ravenclaws went sprinting off the pitch, snorting with laughter. After 2 hours, many complaints, and several tantrums, one involving a crashed Comet 260 and several broken teeth, Harry had found himself 3 chasers. Katie Bell returned to the team after an excellent trial. A new find called Demelza Robbins, who was particularly good at dodging bludgers, and Ginny Weasley, who had outflown all the competition and scored 17 goals to boot. Pleased though he was with his choices, Harry had also shouted himself hoarse at the many complainers, and was now enduring a similar battle with the rejected beaters. "That's my final decision, and if you don't get out of the way of the keepers, I'll hex you," he bellowed. Neither of his chosen beaters had the old brilliance of Fred and George, but he was still reasonably pleased with them. Jimmy Peaks, a short but broad-chested third-year boy, who had managed to raise a lump the size of an egg on the back of Harry's head with a ferociously hit bludger, and Richie Coote, who looked weedy but aimed well. They now joined Katie, Demelza, and Ginny in the stands to watch the selection of their last team member. Harry had deliberately left the trial of the keepers until last, hoping for an emptier stadium and less pressure on all concerned. Unfortunately, however, all the rejected players and a number of people who had come down to watch after a lengthy breakfast had joined the crowd by now, so that it was larger than ever. As each keeper flew up to the goal hoops, the crowd roared and jeered in equal measure. Harry glanced over at Ron, who had always had a problem with nerves. Harry had hoped that winning their final match last term might have cured it, but apparently not. Ron was a delicate shade of green. None of the first 5 applicants saved more than 2 goals apiece. To Harry's great disappointment, Cormac McLagan saved 4 penalties out of 5. On the last one, however, he shot off in completely the wrong direction. The crowd laughed and booed, and McLagan returned to the ground grinding his teeth. Ron looked ready to pass out as he mounted his clean sweep 11. "Good luck," cried a voice from the stands. Harry looked around, expecting to see Hermione, but it was Lavender Brown. He would have quite liked to have hidden his face in his hands, as she did a moment later, but thought that as the captain he ought to show slightly more grit, and so turned to watch Ron do his trial. Yet he need not have worried. Ron saved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 penalties in a row. Delighted, and resisting joining in the cheers of the crowd with difficulty, Harry turned to McLagan to tell him that, most unfortunately, Ron had beaten him, only to find McLagan's red face inches from his own. He stepped back hastily. "His sister didn't really try," said McLagan menacingly. There was a vein pulsing in his temple like the one Harry had often admired in Uncle Vernon's. "She gave him an easy save." "Rubbish," said Harry coldly. "That was the one he nearly missed." McLagan took a step nearer Harry, who stood his ground this time. "Give me another go." "No," said Harry. "You've had your go. You saved 4. Ron saved 5. Ron's keeper, he won it fair and square. Get out of my way." He thought for a moment that McLagan might punch him, but he contented himself with an ugly grimace and stormed away, growling what sounded like threats to thin air. Harry turned around to find his new team beaming at him. "Well done," he croaked. "You flew really well, you did brilliantly, Ron." This time it really was Hermione running toward them from the stands. Harry saw Lavender walking off the pitch, arm in arm with Parvati, a rather grumpy expression on her face. Ron looked extremely pleased with himself, and even taller than usual, as he grinned at the team and at Hermione. After fixing the time of their first full practice for the following Thursday, Harry, Ron, and Hermione bade goodbye to the rest of the team and headed off toward Hagrid's. A watery sun was trying to break through the clouds now, and it had stopped drizzling at last. Harry felt extremely hungry. He hoped there would be something to eat at Hagrid's. "I thought I was going to miss that 4th penalty," Ron was saying happily. "Tricky shot from Demelza, did you see?" Had a bit of spin on it, yes, yes, you were magnificent, said Hermione, looking amused. I was better than that McLagan anyway, said Ron in a highly satisfied voice. Did you see him lumbering off in the wrong direction on his fifth? Looked like he'd been confounded. To Harry's surprise, Hermione turned a very deep shade of pink at these words. Ron noticed nothing. He was too busy describing each of his other penalties in loving detail. The great grey hippogriff, Buckbeak, was tethered in front of Hagrid's cabin. He clicked his razor-sharp beak at their approach, and turned his huge head toward them. Oh dear, said Hermione nervously. He's still a bit scary, isn't he? Come off it, you've ridden him, haven't you, said Ron. Harry stepped forward and bowed low to the hippogriff, without breaking eye contact or blinking. After a few seconds, Buckbeak sank into a bow too. How are you? Harry asked him in a low voice, moving forward to stroke the feathery head. Missing him? But you're okay here with Hagrid, aren't you? Oi, said a loud voice. Hagrid had come striding around the corner of his cabin wearing a large flowery apron, and carrying a sack of potatoes. His enormous boarhound, Fang, was at his heels. Fang gave a booming bark and bounded forward. Git away from him. He'll have your fingers It's your lot. Fang was jumping up at Hermione and Ron, attempting to lick their ears. Hagrid stood and looked at them all for a split second, then turned and strode into his cabin, slamming the door behind him. Oh dear, said Hermione, looking stricken. Don't worry about it, said Harry grimly. He walked over to the door and knocked loudly. Hagrid. Open up, we want to talk to you. There was no sound from within. If you don't open the door, we'll blast it open, Harry said, pulling out his wand. Harry, said Hermione, sounding shocked. You can't possibly. Yeah, I can, said Harry. Stand back, but before he could say anything else, the door flew open again as Harry had known it would, and there stood Hagrid, glowering down at him and looking, despite the flowery apron, positively alarming. I'm a teacher, he roared at Harry. A teacher, Potter. How dare ye threaten to break down my door? I'm sorry, sir, said Harry, emphasizing the last word as he stowed his wand inside his robes. Hagrid looked stunned. Since when have ye called me sir? Since when have you called me Potter? Oh, very clever, growled Hagrid. Very amusing. That's me outsmarted, innit? All right, come in then, ye ungrateful little. Mumbling darkly, he stood back to let them pass. Hermione scurried in after Harry, looking rather frightened. Well, said Hagrid grumpily, as Harry, Ron, and Hermione sat down around his enormous wooden table, Fang laying his head immediately upon Harry's knee and drooling all over his robes. What's this? Feeling sorry for me? Reckon I'm lonely or summat? No, said Harry at once. We wanted to see you. We've missed you, said Hermione tremulously. Missed me, have ye? Snorted Hagrid. Yeah. Right? He stomped around, brewing up tea in his enormous copper kettle, muttering all the while. Finally he slammed down 3 bucket-sized mugs of mahogany brown tea in front of them and a plate of his rock cakes. Harry was hungry enough even for Hagrid's cooking, and took one at once. Hagrid, said Hermione timidly, when he joined them at the table and started peeling his potatoes with a brutality that suggested that each tuber had done him a great personal wrong. we really wanted to carry on with care of magical creatures, you know. Hagrid gave another great snort. Harry rather thought some bogies landed on the potatoes, and was inwardly thankful that they were not staying for dinner. We did, said Hermione. But none of us could fit it into our schedules. Yeah. Right, said Hagrid again. There was a funny squelching sound and they all looked around. Hermione let out a tiny shriek, and Ron leapt out of his seat and hurried around the table away from the large barrel standing in the corner that they had only just noticed. It was full of what looked like foot-long maggots, slimy, white, and writhing. What are they? Hagrid asked Harry, trying to sound interested rather than revolted, but putting down his rock cake all the same. Just giant grubs, said Hagrid. And they grow into, said Ron, looking apprehensive. They won't grow into nothing, said Hagrid. I got to feed to Aragog. And without warning, he burst into tears. Hagrid, cried Hermione, leaping up, hurrying around the table the long way to avoid the barrel of maggots, and putting an arm around his shaking shoulders. What is it? It's him. Gulped Hagrid, his beetle-black eyes streaming as he mopped his face with his apron. It's Aragog. I think he's din. He got ill over the summer and he's not gettin' better. I don't know what I'll do if he. We've been together so long. Hermione patted Hagrid's shoulder, looking at a complete loss for anything to say. Harry knew how she felt. He had known Hagrid to present a vicious baby dragon with a teddy bear, seen him croon over giant scorpions with suckers and stingers, attempt to reason with his brutal giant of a half-brother. But this was perhaps the most incomprehensible of all his monster fancies. The gigantic talking spider, Aragog, who dwelled deep in the Forbidden Forest, and which he and Ron had only narrowly escaped 4 years previously. Is there anything we can do? Hermione asked, ignoring Ron's frantic grimaces and headshakings. I don't think there is, Hermione, choked Hagrid, attempting to stem the flood of his tears. See, the rest o' the tribe. Aragog's family, they're gettin' a bit funny now he's ill, bit restive. Yeah, I think we saw a bit of that side of them, said Ron in an undertone. I don't reckon it'd be safe for anyone but me to go near the colony at the Mow, Hagrid finished, blowing his nose hard on his apron and looking up. But thanks for offering, Hermione. It means a lot. After that, the atmosphere lightened considerably, for although neither Harry nor Ron had shown any inclination to go and feed giant grubs to a murderous, gargantuan spider, Hagrid seemed to take it for granted that they would have liked to have done and became his usual self once more. I always knew yet find it hard to squeeze me into your timetables, he said gruffly, pouring them more tea. Even if ye applied for time turners. We couldn't have done, said Hermione. We smashed the entire stock of ministry time turners when we were there last summer. It was in the Daily Prophet. Ah, well then, said Hagrid. There's no way ye could have done it. I'm sorry I've been no I've just been worried about Aragog. And I did wonder whether, if Professor Grublerplank had been teaching at which all three of them stated categorically and untruthfully that Professor Grublerplank, who had substituted for Hagrid a few times, was a dreadful teacher, with the result that by the time Hagrid waved them off the premises at dusk, he looked quite cheerful. I'm starving, said Harry, once the door had closed behind them and they were hurrying through the dark and deserted grounds. He had abandoned the rock cake after an ominous cracking noise from one of his back teeth. And I've got that detention with Snape tonight. I haven't got much time for dinner. As they came into the castle, they spotted Cormac McLaggen entering the great hall. It took him 2 attempts to get through the doors. He ricocheted off the frame on the first attempt. Ron merely guffawed gloatingly and strode off into the hall after him, but Harry caught Hermione's arm and held her back. "What?" said Hermione defensively. "If you ask me," said Harry quietly, "McLaggen looks like he was confounded this morning. And he was standing right in front of where you were sitting." Hermione blushed. "Oh, all right then, I did it," she whispered. "But you should have heard the way he was talking about Ron and Ginny. Anyway, he's got a nasty temper. You saw how he reacted when he didn't get in. You wouldn't have wanted someone like that on the team." "No," said Harry. "No, I suppose that's true. But wasn't that dishonest, Hermione? I mean, you're a prefect, aren't you?" "Oh, be quiet," she snapped as he smirked. "What are you two doing?" demanded Ron, reappearing in the doorway to the Great Hall and looking suspicious. "Nothing," said Harry and Hermione together, and they hurried after Ron. The smell of roast beef made Harry's stomach ache with hunger, but they had barely taken 3 steps toward the Gryffindor table when Professor Slughorn appeared in front of them, blocking their path. Harry, just the man I was hoping to see," he boomed genially, twiddling the ends of his walrus mustache and puffing out his enormous belly. "I was hoping to catch you before dinner. What do you say to a spot of supper tonight in my rooms instead? We're having a little party, just a few rising stars. I've got McLaggen coming and Zabini, the charming Melinda Bobbin. I don't know whether you know her. Her family owns a large chain of apothecaries and, of course, I hope very much that Miss Granger will favor me by coming too." Slughorn made Hermione a little bow as he finished speaking. It was as though Ron was not present. Slughorn did not so much as look at him. "I can't come, Professor," said Harry at once. "I've got a detention with Professor Snape." "Oh dear," said Slughorn, his face falling comically. Dear, I was counting on you, Harry." "Well, now, I'll just have to have a word with Severus and explain the situation. I'm sure I'll be able to persuade him to postpone your detention." "Yes, I'll see you both later." He bustled away out of the hall. "He's got no chance of persuading Snape," said Harry, the moment Slughorn was out of earshot. "This detention's already been postponed once. Snape did it for Dumbledore, but he won't do it for anyone else." "Oh, I wish you could come. I don't want to go on my own," said Hermione anxiously. Harry knew that she was thinking about McLaggen. "I doubt you'll be alone. Gin'll probably be invited," snapped Ron, who did not seem to have taken kindly to being ignored by Slughorn. After dinner they made their way back to Gryffindor Tower. The common room was very crowded, as most people had finished dinner by now, but they managed to find a free table and sat down. Ron, who had been in a bad mood ever since the encounter with Slughorn, folded his arms and frowned at the ceiling. Hermione reached out for a copy of the Evening Prophet, which somebody had left abandoned on a chair. "Anything new?" said Harry. "Not really." Hermione had opened the newspaper and was scanning the inside pages. "Oh, look, your dad's in here, Ron. He's all right," she added quickly, for Ron had looked around in alarm. "It just says he's been to visit the Malfoys' house." This second search of the Death Eater's residence does not seem to have yielded any results. Arthur Weasley of the Office for the Detection and Confiscation of Counterfeit Defensive Spells and Protective Objects said that his team had been acting upon a confidential tip-off. "Yeah, mine," said Harry. I told him at King's Cross about Malfoy, and that thing he was trying to get Borgin to fix. Well, if it's not at their house, he must have brought whatever it is to Hogwarts with him, but how can he have done, Harry? Said Hermione, putting down the newspaper with a surprised look. We were all searched when we arrived, weren't we? Were you? Said Harry, taken aback. I wasn't. Oh no, of course you weren't. I forgot you were late. Well, Filch ran over all of us with secrecy sensors when we got into the entrance hall. Any dark object would have been found. I know for a fact Crabbe had a shrunken head confiscated. So you see, Malfoy can't have brought in anything dangerous. Momentarily stymied, Harry watched Ginny Weasley playing with Arnold the Pygmy Puff for a while before seeing a way around this objection. Someone sent it to him by Owl, then, he said. His mother or someone. All the owls are being checked too, said Hermione. Filch told us so when he was jabbing those secrecy sensors everywhere he could reach. Really stumped this time, Harry found nothing else to say. There did not seem to be any way Malfoy could have brought a dangerous or dark object into the school. He looked hopefully at Ron, who was sitting with his arms folded, staring over at Lavender Brown. Can you think of any way, Malfoy? Oh, drop it, Harry, said Ron. Listen, it's not my fault Slughorn invited Hermione and me to his stupid party. Neither of us wanted to go, you know, said Harry, firing up. Well, as I'm not invited to any parties, said Ron, getting to his feet again, I think I'll go to bed. He stomped off toward the door to the boys' dormitories, leaving Harry and Hermione staring after him. Harry, said the new chaser, Demelza Robbins, appearing suddenly at his shoulder. I've got a message for you. From Professor Slughorn, asked Harry, sitting up hopefully. No, from Professor Snape, said Demelza. Harry's heart sank. He says you're to come to his office at 8:30 tonight to do your detention, no matter how many party invitations you've received. And he wanted you to know you'll be sorting out rotten flobberworms from good ones, to use in potions, and he says there's no need to bring protective gloves. Right, said Harry grimly. Thanks a lot, Demelza. Chapter 12, Silver and Opals. Where was Dumbledore, and what was he doing? Harry caught sight of the headmaster only twice over the next few weeks. He rarely appeared at meals anymore, and Harry was sure Hermione was right in thinking that he was leaving the school for days at a time. Had Dumbledore forgotten the lessons he was supposed to be giving Harry? Dumbledore had said that the lessons were leading to something to do with the prophecy. Harry had felt bolstered, comforted, and now he felt slightly abandoned. Halfway through October came their first trip of the term to Hogsmeade. Harry had wondered whether these trips would still be allowed, given the increasingly tight security measures around the school, but was pleased to know that they were going ahead. It was always good to get out of the castle grounds for a few hours. Harry woke early on the morning of the trip, which was proving stormy, and whiled away the time until breakfast by reading his copy of Advanced Potion Making. He did not usually lie in bed reading his textbooks. That sort of behavior, as Ron rightly said, was indecent in anybody except Hermione, who was simply weird that way. Harry felt, however, that the Half-Blood Prince's copy of Advanced Potion Making hardly qualified as a textbook. The more Harry pored over the book, the more he realized how much was in there, not only the handy hints and shortcuts on potions that was earning him such a glowing reputation with Slughorn, but also the imaginative little jinxes and hexes scribbled in the margins, which Harry was sure judging by the crossings out and revisions, that the prince had invented himself. Harry had already attempted a few of the prince's self-invented spells. There had been a hex that caused toenails to grow alarmingly fast. He had tried this on Crabbe in the corridor, with very entertaining results, a jinx that glued the tongue to the roof of the mouth, which he had twice used, to general applause, on an unsuspecting Argus Filch, and perhaps most useful of all, Muffliato, a spell that filled the ears of anyone nearby with an unidentifiable buzzing, so that lengthy conversations could be held in class without being overheard. The only person who did not find these charms amusing was Hermione, who maintained a rigidly disapproving expression throughout, and refused to talk at all if Harry had used the Muffliato spell on anyone in the vicinity. Sitting up in bed, Harry turned the book sideways so as to examine more closely the scribbled instructions for a spell that seemed to have caused the prince some trouble. There were many crossings out and alterations, but finally, crammed into a corner of the page, the scribble, Levi Corpus, NVBL, while the wind and sleet pounded relentlessly on the windows, and Neville snored loudly. Harry stared at the letters in brackets. NVBL, that had to mean non-verbal. Harry rather doubted he would be able to bring off this particular spell. He was still having difficulty with non-verbal spells, something Snape had been quick to comment on in every D.A. class. On the other hand, the prince had proved a much more effective teacher than Snape so far. Pointing his wand at nothing in particular, he gave it an upward flick and said Levi Corpus. Inside his head. Ah! There was a flash of light and the room was full of voices. Everyone had woken up as Ron had let out a yell. Harry sent advanced potion-making flying in panic. Ron was dangling upside down in mid-air as though an invisible hook had hoisted him up by the ankle. Sorry, yelled Harry, as Dean and Seamus roared with laughter, and Neville picked himself up from the floor, having fallen out of bed. Hang on, I'll let you down. He groped for the potion book and riffled through it in a panic, trying to find the right page. At last he located it and deciphered the cramped word underneath the spell, praying that this was a counterjinx. Harry thought Libra Corpus. With all his might. There was another flash of light, and Ron fell in a heap onto his mattress. Sorry, repeated Harry weakly, while Dean and Seamus continued to roar with laughter. Tomorrow, said Ron in a muffled voice, I'd rather you set the alarm clock. By the time they had got dressed, padding themselves out with several of Mrs. Weasley's hand-knitted sweaters and carrying cloaks, scarves, and gloves, Ron's shock had subsided and he had decided that Harry's new spell was highly amusing. So amusing, in fact, that he lost no time in regaling Hermione with the story as they sat down for breakfast. And then there was another flash of light, and I landed on the bed again. Ron grinned, helping himself to sausages. Hermione had not cracked a smile during this anecdote, and now turned an expression of wintry disapproval upon Harry. Was this spell, by any chance, another one from that potion book of yours? She asked. Harry frowned at her. Always jump to the worst conclusion, don't you? Was it? Well, yeah, it was, but so what? So you just decided to try out an unknown, handwritten incantation, and see what would happen. Why does it matter if it's handwritten? Said Harry, preferring not to answer the rest of the question. Because it's probably not Ministry of Magic approved, said Hermione. And also, she added, as Harry and Ron rolled their eyes, because I'm starting to think this prince character was a bit dodgy. Both Harry and Ron shouted her down at once. It was a laugh, said Ron, appending a ketchup bottle over his sausages. Just a laugh, Hermione, that's all. Dangling people upside down by the ankle, said Hermione. Who puts their time and energy into making up spells like that? Fred and George, said Ron, shrugging, it's their kind of thing. And, my dad, said Harry. He had only just remembered. What? Said Ron and Hermione together. My dad used this spell, said Harry. Lupin told me. This last part was not true. In fact, Harry had seen his father use the spell on Snape, but he had never told Ron and Hermione about that particular excursion into the Pensieve. Now, however, a wonderful possibility occurred to him. Could the Half-Blood Prince possibly be? Maybe your dad did use it, Harry, said Hermione, but he's not the only one. We've seen a whole bunch of people use it, in case you've forgotten. Dangling people in the air. Making them float along, asleep, helpless. Harry stared at her. With a sinking feeling, he too remembered the behavior of the Death Eaters at the Quidditch World Cup. Ron came to his aid. That was different, he said robustly. They were abusing it. Harry and his dad were just having a laugh. You don't like the prince, Hermione, he added, pointing a sausage at her sternly. Because he's better than you at potions. It's got nothing to do with that, said Hermione, her cheeks reddening. I just think it's very irresponsible to start performing spells when you don't even know what they are for, and stop talking about the prince as if it's his title. I bet it's just a stupid nickname, and it doesn't seem as though he was a very nice person to me. I don't see where you get that from, said Harry heatedly. If he'd been a budding Death Eater, he wouldn't have been boasting about being a half-blood, would he? Even as he said it, Harry remembered that his father had been pureblood, but he pushed the thought out of his mind. He would worry about that later. The Death Eaters can't all be pureblood. There aren't enough pureblood wizards left, said Hermione stubbornly. I expect most of them are half-bloods pretending to be pure. It's only Muggleborns they hate. They'd be quite happy to let you and Ron join up. There is no way they'd let me be a Death Eater, said Ron indignantly, a bit of sausage flying off the fork he was now brandishing at Hermione and hitting Ernie Macmillan on the head. My whole family are blood traitors. That's as bad as Muggleborns to Death Eaters. And they'd love to have me, said Harry sarcastically. We'd be best pals if they didn't keep trying to dome in. This made Ron laugh. Even Hermione gave a grudging smile, and a distraction arrived in the shape of Ginny. Hey, Harry, I'm supposed to give you this. It was a scroll of parchment, with Harry's name written upon it in familiar thin, slanting writing. Thanks, Ginny. It's Dumbledore's next lesson. Harry told Ron and Hermione, pulling open the parchment and quickly reading its contents. Monday evening. He felt suddenly light and happy. Want to join us in Hogsmeade, Ginny? He asked. I'm going with Dean, might see you there, she replied, waving at them as she left. Filch was standing at the oak front doors as usual, checking off the names of people who had permission to go into Hogsmeade. The process took even longer than normal as Filch was triple-checking everybody with his secrecy sensor. What does it matter if we're smuggling dark stuff out? Demanded Ron, eyeing the long thin secrecy sensor with apprehension. Surely you ought to be checking what we bring back, Ian. His cheek earned him a few extra jabs with the sensor, and he was still wincing as they stepped out into the wind and sleet. The walk into Hogsmeade was not enjoyable. Harry wrapped his scarf over his lower face. The exposed part soon felt both raw and numb. The road to the village was full of students, bent double against the bitter wind. More than once Harry wondered whether they might not have had a better time in the warm common room, and when they finally reached Hogsmeade and saw that Zonko's joke shop had been boarded up, Harry took it as confirmation that this trip was not destined to be fun. Ron pointed, with a thickly gloved hand, toward Honeyduke's, which was mercifully open, and Harry and Hermione staggered in his wake into the crowded shop. "Thank God," shivered Ron as they were enveloped by warm, toffee-scented air. "Let's stay here all afternoon." "Harry, boy," said a booming voice from behind them. "Oh no," muttered Harry. The three of them turned to see Professor Slughorn, who was wearing an enormous furry hat and an overcoat with matching fur collar, clutching a large bag of crystallized pineapple, and occupying at least a quarter of the shop. "Harry, that's 3 of my little suppers you've missed now," said Slughorn, poking him genially in the chest. "It won't do, boy, I'm determined to have you. Miss Granger loves them, don't you?" "Yes," said Hermione helplessly, "they are really, so why don't you come along, Harry?" demanded Slughorn. "Well, I've had Quidditch practice, Professor," said Harry, who had indeed been scheduling practices every time Slughorn had sent him a little, violet ribbon-adorned invitation. This strategy meant that Ron was not left out, and they usually had a laugh with Ginny, imagining Hermione shut up with McLaggen and Zabini. "Well, I certainly expect you to win your first match, after all the hard work," said Slughorn. "But a little recreation never hurt anybody. Now, how about Monday night? You can't possibly want to practice in this weather." "I can't, Professor, I've got an appointment with Professor Dumbledore that evening." "Unlucky again," cried Slughorn dramatically. "Ah well, you can't evade me forever, Harry." And with a regal wave, he waddled out of the shop, taking as little notice of Ron as though he had been a display of cockroach clusters. "I can't believe you've wriggled out of another one," said Hermione, shaking her head. "They're not that bad, you know, they're even quite fun sometimes." But then she caught sight of Ron's expression. "Oh, look, they've got deluxe sugar quills, those would last hours." Glad that Hermione had changed the subject, Harry showed much more interest in the new extra-large sugar quills than he would normally have done, but Ron continued to look moody and merely shrugged when Hermione asked him where he wanted to go next. "Let's go to the Three Broomsticks," said Harry. "It'll be warm." They bundled their scarves back over their faces and left the sweet shop. The bitter wind was like knives on their faces after the sugary warmth of Honeyduke's. The street was not very busy, nobody was lingering to chat, just hurrying toward their destinations. The exceptions were 2 men a little ahead of them, standing just outside the Three Broomsticks. One was very tall and thin. Squinting through his rain-washed glasses, Harry recognized the barman who worked in the other Hogsmeade pub, the Hog's Head. As Harry, Ron, and Hermione drew closer, the barman drew his cloak more tightly around his neck and walked away, leaving the shorter man to fumble with something in his arms. They were barely feet from him when Harry realized who the man was. Mundungus. The squat, bandy-legged man with long, straggly, ginger hair jumped and dropped an ancient suitcase, which burst open, releasing what looked like the entire contents of a junk shop window. "Oh, hello, Ari," said Mundungus Fletcher, with a most unconvincing stab at airiness. "Well, don't let me keep YA." And he began scrabbling on the ground to retrieve the contents of his suitcase, with every appearance of a man eager to be gone. "Are you selling this stuff?" asked Harry, watching Mundungus grab an assortment of grubber-looking objects from the ground. "Oh, well, gotta scrape a living," said Mundungus. Gimme that. Ron had stooped down and picked up something silver. Hang on, Ron said slowly. This looks familiar, thank you, said Mundungus, snatching the goblet out of Ron's hand and stuffing it back into the case. Well, I'll see you all ouch. Harry had pinned Mundungus against the wall of the pub by the throat. Holding him fast with one hand, he pulled out his wand. Harry, squealed Hermione. You took that from Sinus's house, said Harry, who was almost nose to nose with Mundungus, and was breathing in an unpleasant smell of old tobacco and spirits. That had the Black family crest on it. I know what, spluttered Mundungus, who was slowly turning purple. What did you do? Go back the night he died and strip the place, snarled Harry. I know, give it to me. Harry, you mustn't, shrieked Hermione, as Mundungus started to turn blue. There was a bang, and Harry felt his hands fly off Mundungus's throat. Gasping and spluttering, Mundungus seized his fallen case, then crack, he disapparated. Harry swore at the top of his voice, spinning on the spot to see where Mundungus had gone. Come back, you thieving. There's no point, Harry. Tonks had appeared out of nowhere, her mousy hair wet with sleet. Mundungus will probably be in London by now. There's no point yelling. He's nicked Sirius's stuff. Nicked it? Yes, but still, said Tonks, who seemed perfectly untroubled by this piece of information. You should get out of the cold. She watched them go through the door of the Three Broomsticks. The moment he was inside, Harry burst out, he was nicking Sirius's stuff. I know, Harry, but please don't shout, people are staring, whispered Hermione. Go and sit down, I'll get you a drink. Harry was still fuming when Hermione returned to their table a few minutes later holding 3 bottles of butterbeer. Can't the order control Mundungus? Harry demanded of the other 2 in a furious whisper. Can't they at least stop him stealing everything that's not fixed down when he's at headquarters? Sure, said Hermione desperately, looking around to make sure nobody was listening. There were a couple of warlocks sitting close by who were staring at Harry with great interest, and Zabini was lolling against a pillar not far away. Harry, I'd be annoyed too. I know it's your things he's stealing, Harry gagged on his butterbeer. He had momentarily forgotten that he owned number 12, Grimmauld Place. Yeah, it's my stuff, he said. No wonder he wasn't pleased, Tozimi. Well, I'm going to tell Dumbledore what's going on. He's the only one who scares Mundungus. Good idea, whispered Hermione, clearly pleased that Harry was calming down. Ron, what are you staring at? Nothing, said Ron, hastily looking away from the bar, but Harry knew he was trying to catch the eye of the curvy and attractive barmaid, Madame Rosmerta, for whom he had long nursed a soft spot. I expect nothing's in the back getting more fire whiskey, said Hermione waspishly. Ron ignored this jibe, sipping his drink in what he evidently considered to be a dignified silence. Harry was thinking about Sirius, and how he had hated those silver goblets anyway. Hermione drummed her fingers on the table, her eyes flickering between Ron and the bar. The moment Harry drained the last drops in his bottle she said, "Shall we call it a day, and go back to school, then?" The other 2 nodded. It had not been a fun trip, and the weather was getting worse the longer they stayed. Once again, they drew their cloaks tightly around them, rearranged their scarves, pulled on their gloves, then followed Katie Bell and a friend out of the pub and back up the high street. Harry's thoughts strayed to Ginny as they trudged up the road to Hogwarts through the frozen slush. They had not met up with her, undoubtedly, thought Harry, because she and Dean were cosily closeted in Madame Puddifoot's tea shop, that haunt of happy couples. Scowling, he bowed his head against the swirling sleet and trudged on. It was a little while before Harry became aware that the voices of Katie Bell and her friend, which were being carried back to him on the wind, had become shriller and louder. Harry squinted at their indistinct figures. The two girls were having an argument about something Katie was holding in her hand. "It's nothing to do with you, Leanne," Harry heard Katie say. They rounded a corner in the lane, sleet coming thick and fast, blurring Harry's glasses. Just as he raised a gloved hand to wipe them, Leanne made to grab hold of the package Katie was holding. Katie tugged it back and the package fell to the ground. At once, Katie rose into the air, not as Ron had done, suspended comically by the ankle, but gracefully, her arms outstretched, as though she was about to fly. Yet there was something wrong, something eerie. Her hair was whipped around her by the fierce wind, but her eyes were closed and her face was quite empty of expression. Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Leanne had all halted in their tracks, watching. Then, 6 feet above the ground, Katie let out a terrible scream. Her eyes flew open, but whatever she could see, or whatever she was feeling, was clearly causing her terrible anguish. She screamed and screamed. Leanne started to scream too, and seized Katie's ankles, trying to tug her back to the ground. Harry, Ron, and Hermione rushed forward to help, but even as they grabbed Katie's legs, she fell on top of them. Harry and Ron managed to catch her, but she was writhing so much they could hardly hold her. Instead they lowered her to the ground where she thrashed and screamed, apparently unable to recognize any of them. Harry looked around. The landscape seemed deserted. "Stay there," he shouted at the others over the howling wind. "I'm going for help." He began to sprint toward the school. He had never seen anyone behave as Katie had just behaved and could not think what had caused it. He hurtled around a bend in the lane and collided with what seemed to be an enormous bear on its hind legs. "Hagrid," he panted, disentangling himself from the hedgerow into which he had fallen. "Harry," said Hagrid, who had sleet trapped in his eyebrows and beard, and was wearing his great, shaggy beaverskin coat. "Just been visitin' Graup. His coming on so well, yeah, Walden Hagrid. Someone's hurt back there, or cursed, or something." "What?" said Hagrid, bending lower to hear what Harry was saying over the raging wind. "Someone's been cursed," bellowed Harry. "Cursed? Who's been cursed? Not Ron. Hermione. No, it's not them, it's Katie Bell this way." Together they ran back along the lane. It took them no time to find the little group of people around Katie, who was still writhing and screaming on the ground. Ron, Hermione, and Leanne were all trying to quiet her. "Get back," shouted Hagrid. "Lemme see her." "Something's happened to her," sobbed Leanne. "I don't know what." Hagrid stared at Katie for a second, then without a word, bent down, scooped her into his arms, and ran off toward the castle with her. Within seconds, Katie's piercing screams had died away, and the only sound was the roar of the wind. Hermione hurried over to Katie's wailing friend and put an arm around her. "It's Leanne, isn't it?" The girl nodded. "Did it just happen all of a sudden, or?" "It was when that package tore," sobbed Leanne, pointing at the now sodden brown paper package on the ground, which had split open to reveal a greenish glitter. Ron bent down, his hand outstretched, but Harry seized his arm and pulled him back. "Don't touch it." He crouched down. An ornate opal necklace was visible, poking out of the paper. I've seen that before, said Harry, staring at the thing. It was on display in Borgin and Burke's ages ago. The label said it was cursed. Katie must have touched it. He looked up at Leanne, who had started to shake uncontrollably. How did Katie get hold of this? Well, that's why we were arguing. She came back from the bathroom in the Three Broomsticks holding it. Said it was a surprise for somebody at Hogwarts, and she had to deliver it. She looked all funny when she said it. Oh no, oh no. I bet she'd been imperious and I didn't realize. Leanne shook with renewed sobs. Hermione patted her shoulder gently. She didn't say who'd given it to her, Leanne. No. She wouldn't tell me, and I said she was being stupid and not to take it up to school, but she just wouldn't listen, and then I tried to grab it from her. And Leanne let out a wail of despair. We'd better get up to school, said Hermione, her arm still around Leanne. We'll be able to find out how she is. Come on. Harry hesitated for a moment, then pulled his scarf from around his face, and, ignoring Ron's gasp, carefully covered the necklace in it and picked it up. We'll need to show this to Madame Pomfrey, he said. As they followed Hermione and Leanne up the road, Harry was thinking furiously. They had just entered the grounds when he spoke, unable to keep his thoughts to himself any longer. Malfoy knows about this necklace. It was in a case at Borgin and Burke's 4 years ago. I saw him having a good look at it while I was hiding from him and his dad. This is what he was buying that day when we followed him. He remembered it and he went back for it. I dunno, Harry, said Ron hesitantly. Loads of people go to Borgin and Burke. And didn't that girl say Katie got it in the girls' bathroom? She said she came back from the bathroom with it. She didn't necessarily get it in the bathroom itself, McGonagall, said Ron warningly. Harry looked up. Sure enough, Professor McGonagall was hurrying down the stone steps through swirling sleet to meet them. Hagrid says you foresaw what happened to Katie Bell upstairs to my office at once, please. What's that you're holding, Potter? It's the thing she touched, said Harry. Good Lord, said Professor McGonagall, looking alarmed as she took the necklace from Harry. No, Filch, they are with me, she added hastily, as Filch came shuffling eagerly across the entrance hall holding his secrecy sensor aloft. Take this necklace to Professor Snape at once, but be sure not to touch it, keep it wrapped in the scarf. Harry and the others followed Professor McGonagall upstairs and into her office. The sleet-spattered windows were rattling in their frames, and the room was chilly despite the fire crackling in the grate. Professor McGonagall closed the door and swept around her desk to face Harry, Ron, Hermione, and the still sobbing Leanne. Well, she said sharply. What happened? Haltingly, and with many pauses while she attempted to control her crying, Leanne told Professor McGonagall how Katie had gone to the bathroom in the Three Broomsticks and returned holding the unmarked package, how Katie had seemed a little odd, and how they had argued about the advisability of agreeing to deliver unknown objects, the argument culminating in the tussle over the parcel, which tore open. At this point, Leanne was so overcome, there was no getting another word out of her. All right, said Professor McGonagall, not unkindly, go up to the hospital wing, please, Leanne, and get Madame Pomfrey to give you something for shock. When she had left the room, Professor McGonagall turned back to Harry, Ron, and Hermione. What happened when Katie touched the necklace? She rose up in the air, said Harry, before either Ron or Hermione could speak, and then began to scream and collapsed. Professor, can I see Professor Dumbledore, please? The headmaster is away until Monday, Potter, said Professor McGonagall, looking surprised. Away? Harry repeated angrily. Yes, Potter, away, said Professor McGonagall tartly. But anything you have to say about this horrible business can be said to me, I'm sure. For a split second, Harry hesitated. Professor McGonagall did not invite confidences. Dumbledore, though in many ways more intimidating, still seemed less likely to scorn a theory, however wild. This was a life-and-death matter, though, and no moment to worry about being laughed at. I think Draco Malfoy gave Katie that necklace, Professor. On one side of him, Ron rubbed his nose in apparent embarrassment. On the other, Hermione shuffled her feet, as though quite keen to put a bit of distance between herself and Harry. That is a very serious accusation, Potter, said Professor McGonagall, after a shocked pause. Do you have any proof? No, said Harry, but... And he told her about following Malfoy to Borgin and Burke's and the conversation they had overheard between him and Mr. Borgin. When he had finished speaking, Professor McGonagall looked slightly confused. Malfoy took something to Borgin and Burke's for repair. No, Professor, he just wanted Borgin to tell him how to mend something. He didn't have it with him. But that's not the point. The thing is that he bought something at the same time, and I think it was that necklace. You saw Malfoy leaving the shop with a similar package. No, Professor, he told Borgin to keep it in the shop for him, but Harry, Hermione interrupted. Borgin asked him if he wanted to take it with him, and Malfoy said no, because he didn't want to touch it. Obviously, said Harry angrily. What he actually said was, "How would I look carrying that down the street?" said Hermione. Well, he would look a bit of a prat carrying a necklace, interjected Ron. Oh, Ron, said Hermione despairingly, it would be all wrapped up. So he wouldn't have to touch it, and quite easy to hide inside a cloak, so nobody would see it. I think whatever he reserved at Borgin and Burke's was noisy or bulky. Something he knew would draw attention to him if he carried it down the street, and in any case, she pressed on loudly, before Harry could interrupt. I asked Borgin about the necklace. Don't you remember? When I went in to try and find out what Malfoy had asked him to keep, I saw it there. And Borgin just told me the price. He didn't say it was already sold or anything. Well, you were being really obvious. He realized what you were up to within about 5 seconds. Of course he wasn't going to tell you anyway. Malfoy could have sent off for it since that's enough, said Professor McGonagall, as Hermione opened her mouth to retort, looking furious. Potter, I appreciate you telling me this, but we cannot point the finger of blame at Mr. Malfoy purely because he visited the shop where this necklace might have been purchased. The same is probably true of hundreds of people. That's what I said, muttered Ron. And in any case, we have put stringent security measures in place this year. I do not believe that necklace can possibly have entered this school without our knowledge, but and what is more, said Professor McGonagall, with an air of awful finality, Mr. Malfoy was not in Hogsmeade today. Harry gaped at her, deflating. How do you know, Professor? Because he was doing detention with me. He has now failed to complete his transfiguration homework twice in a row. So, thank you for telling me your suspicions, Potter, she said as she marched past them, but I need to go up to the hospital wing now to check on Katie Bell. Good day to you all. She held open her office door. They had no choice but to file past her without another word. Harry was angry with the other two for siding with McGonagall. Nevertheless, he felt compelled to join in once they started discussing what had happened. So who do you reckon Katie was supposed to give the necklace to? Asked Ron, as they climbed the stairs to the common room. Goodness only knows, said Hermione. But whoever it was has had a narrow escape. No one could have opened that package without touching the necklace. It could have been meant for loads of people, said Harry. Dumbledore, the Death Eaters would love to get rid of him. He must be one of their top targets. Or Slughorn, Dumbledore reckons Voldemort really wanted him, and they can't be pleased that he's sided with Dumbledore. Or you, said Hermione, looking troubled. Couldn't have been, said Harry, or Katie would have just turned around in the lane and given it to me, wouldn't she? I was behind her all the way out of the Three Broomsticks. It would have made much more sense to deliver the parcel outside Hogwarts, what with Filch searching everyone who goes in and out. I wonder why Malfoy told her to take it into the castle. Harry, Malfoy wasn't in Hogsmeade, said Hermione, actually stamping her foot in frustration. He must have used an accomplice, then, said Harry. Crabbe or Goyle or, come to think of it, another Death Eater. He'll have loads better cronies than Crabbe and Goyle now he's joined up. Ron and Hermione exchanged looks that plainly said, there's no point arguing with him. Dilligrout, said Hermione firmly as they reached the Fat Lady. The portrait swung open to admit them to the common room. It was quite full and smelled of damp clothing. Many people seemed to have returned from Hogsmeade early because of the bad weather. There was no buzz of fear or speculation, however. Clearly, the news of Katie's fate had not yet spread. It wasn't a very slick attack, really, when you stop and think about it, said Ron, casually turfing a first year out of one of the good armchairs by the fire so that he could sit down. The curse didn't even make it into the castle. Not what you'd call foolproof. You're right, said Hermione, prodding Ron out of the chair with her foot and offering it to the first year again. It wasn't very well thought out at all. But since when has Malfoy been one of the world's great thinkers? Asked Harry. Neither Ron nor Hermione answered him. Chapter 13, The Secret Riddle. Katie was removed to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries the following day, by which time the news that she had been cursed had spread all over the school, though the details were confused and nobody other than Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Leon seemed to know that Katie herself had not been the intended target. Oh, and Malfoy knows, of course, said Harry to Ron and Hermione, who continued their new policy of feigning deafness whenever Harry mentioned his Malfoy is a Death Eater theory. Harry had wondered whether Dumbledore would return from wherever he had been in time for Monday night's lesson, but having had no word to the contrary, he presented himself outside Dumbledore's office at 8 o'clock, knocked, and was told to enter. There sat Dumbledore looking unusually tired. His hand was as black and burned as ever, but he smiled when he gestured to Harry to sit down. The pensieve was sitting on the desk again, casting silvery specks of light over the ceiling. You have had a busy time while I have been away, Dumbledore said. I believe you witnessed Katie's accident. Yes, sir. How is she? Still very unwell, although she was relatively lucky. She appears to have brushed the necklace with the smallest possible amount of skin. There was a tiny hole in her glove. Had she put it on, had she even held it in her ungloved hand, she would have died, perhaps instantly. Luckily Professor Snape was able to do enough to prevent a rapid spread of the curse. Why him? Asked Harry quickly. Why not Madame Pomfrey? Impertinent, said a soft voice from one of the portraits on the wall, and Phineas Nigellus Black, Sirius's great-great-grandfather, raised his head from his arms where he had appeared to be sleeping. I would not have permitted a student to question the way Hogwarts operated in my day. Yes, thank you, Phineas, said Dumbledore quellingly. Professor Snape knows much more about the dark arts than Madame Pomfrey, Harry. Anyway, the St. Mungo's staff are sending me hourly reports, and I am hopeful that Katie will make a full recovery in time. Where were you this weekend, sir? Harry asked, disregarding a strong feeling that he might be pushing his luck, a feeling apparently shared by Phineas Nigellus, who hissed softly. I would rather not say just now, said Dumbledore. However, I shall tell you in due course. You will, said Harry, startled. Yes, I expect so, said Dumbledore, withdrawing a fresh bottle of silver memories from inside his robes and uncorking it with a prod of his wand. Sir, said Harry tentatively, I met Mundungus in Hogsmeade. Ah yes. I am already aware that Mundungus has been treating your inheritance with light-fingered contempt, said Dumbledore, frowning a little. He has gone to ground since you accosted him outside the Three Broomsticks. I rather think he dreads facing me. However, rest assured that he will not be making away with any more of Sirius's old possessions. That mangy old half-blood has been stealing black heirlooms, said Phineas Nigellus, incensed, and he stalked out of his frame, undoubtedly to visit his portrait in number 12, Grimmauld Place. Professor, said Harry, after a short pause, did Professor McGonagall tell you what I told her after Katie got hurt? About Draco Malfoy. She told me of your suspicions, yes, said Dumbledore. And do you? I shall take all appropriate measures to investigate anyone who might have had a hand in Katie's accident, said Dumbledore. But what concerns me now, Harry, is our lesson. Harry felt slightly resentful at this. If their lessons were so very important, why had there been such a long gap between the first and second? However, he said no more about Draco Malfoy, but watched as Dumbledore poured the fresh memories into the pensieve and began swirling the stone basin once more between his long-fingered hands. You will remember, I am sure, that we left the tale of Lord Voldemort's beginnings at the point where the handsome Muggle, Tom Riddle, had abandoned his witch wife, Merope, and returned to his family home in Little Hangleton. Merope was left alone in London, expecting the baby who would one day become Lord Voldemort. How do you know she was in London, sir? Because of the evidence of one Carricktaker's Burke, said Dumbledore, who, by an odd coincidence, helped found the very shop whence came the necklace we have just been discussing. He swilled the contents of the pensieve as Harry had seen him swill them before, much as a gold prospector sifts for gold. Up out of the swirling, silvery mass rose a little old man revolving slowly in the pensieve, silver as a ghost but much more solid, with a thatch of hair that completely covered his eyes. Yes, we acquired it in curious circumstances. It was brought in by a young witch just before Christmas, many years ago now. She said she needed the gold badly, well, that much was obvious. Covered in rags and pretty far along. Going to have a baby, see. She said the locket had been Slytherin's. Well, we hear that sort of story all the time. Oh, this was Merlin's, this was his favorite teapot, but when I looked at it, it had his mark all right, and a few simple spells were enough to tell me the truth. Of course, that made it near enough priceless. She didn't seem to have any idea how much it was worth. Happy to get 10 galleons for it. Best bargain we ever made. Dumbledore gave the pensieve an extra vigorous shake, and Carricktaker's Burke descended back into the swirling mass of memory from whence he had come. He only gave her 10 galleons, said Harry indignantly. Carricktaker's Burke was not famed for his generosity, said Dumbledore. So we know that, near the end of her pregnancy, Merope was alone in London and in desperate need of gold, desperate enough to sell her one and only valuable possession, the locket that was one of Marvolo's treasured family heirlooms. But she could do magic, said Harry impatiently. She could have got food and everything for herself by magic, couldn't she? Ah, said Dumbledore, perhaps she could. But it is my belief, I am guessing again, but I am sure I am right, that when her husband abandoned her, Merope stopped using magic. I do not think that she wanted to be a witch any longer. Of course, it is also possible that her unrequited love and the attendant despair sapped her of her powers. That can happen. In any case, as you are about to see, Merope refused to raise her wand even to save her own life. She wouldn't even stay alive for her son. Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. Could you possibly be feeling sorry for Lord Voldemort? No, said Harry quickly, but she had a choice, didn't she? Not like my mother. Your mother had a choice too, said Dumbledore gently. Yes, Merope Riddle chose death in spite of a son who needed her, but do not judge her too harshly, Harry. She was greatly weakened by long suffering, and she never had your mother's courage. And now, if you will stand. Where are we going? Harry asked, as Dumbledore joined him at the front of the desk. This time, said Dumbledore, we are going to enter my memory. I think you will find it both rich in detail and satisfyingly accurate. After you, Harry. Harry bent over the pensieve. His face broke the cool surface of the memory, and then he was falling through darkness again. Seconds later, his feet hit firm ground. He opened his eyes and found that he and Dumbledore were standing in a bustling, old-fashioned London street. There I am, said Dumbledore brightly, pointing ahead of them to a tall figure crossing the road in front of a horse-drawn milk cart. This younger Albus Dumbledore's long hair and beard were auburn. Having reached their side of the street, he strode off along the pavement, drawing many curious glances due to the flamboyantly cut suit of plum velvet that he was wearing. Nice suit, sir, said Harry, before he could stop himself, but Dumbledore merely chuckled as they followed his younger self a short distance, finally passing through a set of iron gates into a bare courtyard that fronted a rather grim, square building surrounded by high railings. He mounted the few steps leading to the front door and knocked once. After a moment or two, the door was opened by a scruffy girl wearing an apron. Good afternoon. I have an appointment with a Mrs. Cole, who, I believe, is the matron here. Oh, said the bewildered-looking girl, taking in Dumbledore's eccentric appearance. Just a mo. Mrs. Cole, she bellowed over her shoulder. Harry heard a distant voice shouting something in response. The girl turned back to Dumbledore. Come in, she's on her way. Dumbledore stepped into a hallway tiled in black and white. The whole place was shabby, but spotlessly clean. Harry and the older Dumbledore followed. Before the front door had closed behind them, a skinny, harassed-looking woman came scurrying toward them. She had a sharp-featured face that appeared more anxious than unkind, and she was talking over her shoulder to another aproned helper, as she walked toward Dumbledore. And take the iodine upstairs to Martha. Billy Stubbs has been picking his scabs and Eric Worley's oozing all over his sheets, chicken pox on top of everything else, she said to nobody in particular, and then her eyes fell upon Dumbledore, and she stopped dead in her tracks, looking as astonished as if a giraffe had just crossed her threshold. Good afternoon, said Dumbledore, holding out his hand. Mrs. Cole simply gaped. My name is Albus Dumbledore. I sent you a letter requesting an appointment, and you very kindly invited me here today. Mrs. Cole blinked. Apparently deciding that Dumbledore was not a hallucination, she said feebly, "Oh yes. Well, then you'd better come into my room." "Yes." She led Dumbledore into a small room that seemed part sitting room, part office. It was as shabby as the hallway, and the furniture was old and mismatched. She invited Dumbledore to sit on a rickety chair, and seated herself behind a cluttered desk, eyeing him nervously. "I am here, as I told you in my letter, to discuss Tom Riddle and arrangements for his future," said Dumbledore. "Are you family?" asked Mrs. Cole. "No, I am a teacher," said Dumbledore. "I have come to offer Tom a place at my school." "What school's this, then?" "It is called Hogwarts," said Dumbledore. "And how come you're interested in Tom?" "We believe he has qualities we are looking for." "You mean he's won a scholarship?" "How can he have done? He's never been entered for one." "Well, his name has been down for our school since birth. Who registered him?" "His parents." There was no doubt that Mrs. Cole was an inconveniently sharp woman. Apparently Dumbledore thought so too, for Harry now saw him slip his wand out of the pocket of his velvet suit, at the same time picking up a piece of perfectly blank paper from Mrs. Cole's desktop. "Here," said Dumbledore, waving his wand once as he passed her the piece of paper. "I think this will make everything clear." Mrs. Cole's eyes slid out of focus and back again, as she gazed intently at the blank paper for a moment. "That seems perfectly in order," she said placidly, handing it back. Then her eyes fell upon a bottle of gin, and 2 glasses, that had certainly not been present a few seconds before. May I offer you a glass of gin?" she said in an extra refined voice. "Thank you very much," said Dumbledore, beaming. It soon became clear that Mrs. Cole was no novice when it came to gin drinking. Pouring both of them a generous measure, she drained her own glass in one gulp. Smacking her lips frankly, she smiled at Dumbledore for the first time, and he didn't hesitate to press his advantage. "I was wondering whether you could tell me anything of Tom Riddle's history." "I think he was born here in the orphanage." "That's right," said Mrs. Cole, helping herself to more gin. "I remember it clear as anything, because I'd just started here myself. New Year's Eve and bitter cold, snowing, you know. Nasty night. And this girl, not much older than I was myself at the time, came staggering up the front steps. Well, she wasn't the first. We took her in, and she had the baby within the hour. And she was dead in another hour." Mrs. Cole nodded impressively, and took another generous gulp of gin. "Did she say anything before she died?" asked Dumbledore. "Anything about the boy's father, for instance?" "Now, as it happens, she did," said Mrs. Cole, who seemed to be rather enjoying herself now, with the gin in her hand and an eager audience for her story. "I remember she said to me, 'I hope he looks like his papa,' and I won't lie, she was right to hope it, because she was no beauty, and then she told me he was to be named Tom, for his father, and Marvolo, for her father. Yes. I know, funny name, isn't it? We wondered whether she came from a circus, and she said the boy's surname was to be Riddle. And she died soon after that without another word. Well, we named him just as she'd said, it seemed so important to the poor girl, but no Tom nor Marvolo nor any kind of Riddle ever came looking for him, nor any family at all. So he stayed in the orphanage, and has been here ever since." Mrs. Cole helped herself, almost absent-mindedly, to another healthy measure of gin. 2 pink spots had appeared high on her cheekbones. Then she said, "He's a funny boy." Yes, said Dumbledore. I thought he might be. He was a funny baby too. He hardly ever cried, you know. And then, when he got a little older, he was odd. Odd in what way? Asked Dumbledore gently. Well, but Mrs. Cole pulled up short, and there was nothing blurry or vague about the inquisitorial glance she shot Dumbledore over her gin glass. He's definitely got a place at your school, you say? Definitely, said Dumbledore. And nothing I say can change that. Nothing, said Dumbledore. You'll be taking him away, whatever. Whatever, repeated Dumbledore gravely. She squinted at him as though deciding whether or not to trust him. Apparently she decided she could, because she said in a sudden rush, he scares the other children. You mean he is a bully? Asked Dumbledore. I think he must be, said Mrs. Cole, frowning slightly, but it's very hard to catch him at it. There have been incidents, nasty things. Dumbledore did not press her, though Harry could tell that he was interested. She took yet another gulp of gin, and her rosy cheeks grew rosier still. Billy Stubbs's rabbit. Well, Tom said he didn't do it and I don't see how he could have done, but even so, it didn't hang itself from the rafters, did it? I shouldn't think so, no, said Dumbledore quietly. But I'm jiggered if I know how he got up there to do it. All I know is he and Billy had argued the day before. And then Mrs. Cole took another swig of gin, slopping a little over her chin this time. On the summer outing we take them out, you know, once a year. To the countryside, or to the seaside. Well, Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop were never quite right afterwards, and all we ever got out of them was that they'd gone into a cave with Tom Riddle. He swore they'd just gone exploring, but something happened in there, I'm sure of it. And, well, there have been a lot of things, funny things. She looked around at Dumbledore again, and though her cheeks were flushed, her gaze was steady. I don't think many people will be sorry to see the back of him. You understand, I'm sure, that we will not be keeping him permanently, said Dumbledore. He will have to return here, at the very least, every summer. Oh, well, that's better than a whack on the nose with a rusty poker, said Mrs. Cole with a slight hiccup. She got to her feet, and Harry was impressed to see that she was quite steady, even though 2/3 of the gin was now gone. I suppose you'd like to see him? Very much, said Dumbledore, rising too. She led him out of her office and up the stone stairs, calling out instructions and admonitions to helpers and children as she passed. The orphans, Harry saw, were all wearing the same kind of greyish tunic. They looked reasonably well cared for, but there was no denying that this was a grim place in which to grow up. Here we are, said Mrs. Cole, as they turned off the second landing and stopped outside the first door in a long corridor. She knocked twice and entered. Tom. You've got a visitor. This is Mr. Dumbarton. Sorry, Dunderbore. He's come to tell you. Well, I'll let him do it. Harry and the two Dumbledores entered the room, and Mrs. Cole closed the door on them. It was a small bare room, with nothing in it except an old wardrobe and an iron bedstead. A boy was sitting on top of the grey blankets, his legs stretched out in front of him, holding a book. There was no trace of the gaunts in Tom Riddle's face. Merope had got her dying wish. He was his handsome father in miniature, tall for 11 years old, dark-haired and pale. His eyes narrowed slightly as he took in Dumbledore's eccentric appearance. There was a moment's silence. How do you do, Tom? Said Dumbledore, walking forward and holding out his hand. The boy hesitated, then took it, and they shook hands. Dumbledore drew up the hard wooden chair beside Riddle, so that the pair of them looked rather like a hospital patient and visitor. "I am Professor Dumbledore." "Professor," repeated Riddle. He looked wary. "Is that like doctor? What are you here for? Did she get you in to have a look at me?" He was pointing at the door through which Mrs. Cole had just left. "No, no," said Dumbledore, smiling. "I don't believe you," said Riddle. "She wants me looked at, doesn't she? Tell the truth." He spoke the last 3 words with a ringing force that was almost shocking. It was a command, and it sounded as though he had given it many times before. His eyes had widened and he was glaring at Dumbledore, who made no response except to continue smiling pleasantly. After a few seconds Riddle stopped glaring, though he looked, if anything, warier still. "Who are you?" "I have told you. My name is Professor Dumbledore, and I work at a school called Hogwarts. I have come to offer you a place at my school, your new school, if you would like to come." Riddle's reaction to this was most surprising. He leapt from the bed and backed away from Dumbledore, looking furious. "You can't kid me. The asylum, that's where you're from, isn't it?" "Professor, yes, of course. Well, I'm not going, see? That old cat's the one who should be in the asylum. I never did anything to little Amy Benson or Dennis Bishop, and you can ask them, they'll tell you." "I am not from the asylum," said Dumbledore patiently. "I am a teacher, and if you will sit down calmly, I shall tell you about Hogwarts. Of course, if you would rather not come to the school, nobody will force you." "I'd like to see them try," sneered Riddle. "Hogwarts," Dumbledore went on, as though he had not heard Riddle's last words, "is a school for people with special abilities. I'm not mad. I know that you are not mad. Hogwarts is not a school for mad people. It is a school of magic." There was silence. Riddle had frozen, his face expressionless, but his eyes were flickering back and forth between each of Dumbledore's, as though trying to catch one of them lying. "Magic," he repeated in a whisper. "That's right," said Dumbledore. It's magic, what I can do." "What is it that you can do?" "All sorts," breathed Riddle. A flush of excitement was rising up his neck into his hollow cheeks. He looked fevered. "I can make things move without touching them. I can make animals do what I want them to do, without training them. I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me. I can make them hurt if I want to." His legs were trembling. He stumbled forward and sat down on the bed again, staring at his hands, his head bowed as though in prayer. "I knew I was different," he whispered to his own quivering fingers. "I knew I was special. Always, I knew there was something." "Well, you were quite right," said Dumbledore, who was no longer smiling, but watching Riddle intently. "You are a wizard." Riddle lifted his head. His face was transfigured. There was a wild happiness upon it, yet for some reason it did not make him better looking. On the contrary, his finely carved features seemed somehow rougher, his expression almost bestial. "Are you a wizard too?" "Yes, I am." "Prove it," said Riddle at once, in the same commanding tone he had used when he had said, "Tell the truth." Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. "If, as I take it, you are accepting your place at Hogwarts, of course I am. Then you will address me as Professor, or Sir." Ron gave a great grunting snore. "She's Ron's sister," Harry told himself firmly. "Ron's sister. She's out of bounds." He would not risk his friendship with Ron for anything. He punched his pillow into a more comfortable shape and waited for sleep to come, trying his utmost not to allow his thoughts to stray anywhere near Ginny. Harry awoke next morning feeling slightly dazed and confused by a series of dreams in which Ron had chased him with a beater's bat, but by midday he would have happily exchanged the dream Ron for the real one, who was not only cold-shouldering Ginny and Dean, but also treating a hurt and bewildered Hermione with an icy, sneering indifference. What was more, Ron seemed to have become, overnight, as touchy and ready to lash out as the average blast-ended Scroot. Harry spent the day attempting to keep the peace between Ron and Hermione with no success. Finally, Hermione departed for bed in high dudgeon, and Ron stalked off to the boys' dormitory after swearing angrily at several frightened first-years for looking at him. To Harry's dismay, Ron's new aggression did not wear off over the next few days. Worse still, it coincided with an even deeper dip in his keeping skills, which made him still more aggressive. So that during the final Quidditch practice, before Saturday's match, he failed to save every single goal the chasers aimed at him, but bellowed at everybody so much that he reduced Demelza Robbins to tears. "You shut up and leave her alone," shouted Peakes, who was about 2/3 Ron's height, though admittedly carrying a heavy bat. "Enough," bellowed Harry, who had seen Ginny glowering in Ron's direction, and, remembering her reputation as an accomplished caster of the bat bogey hex, soared over to intervene before things got out of hand. "Peakes, go and pack up the bludgers. Demelza, pull yourself together, you played really well today." "Ron." He waited until the rest of the team were out of earshot before saying it. "You're my best mate, but carry on treating the rest of them like this and I'm going to kick you off the team." He really thought for a moment that Ron might hit him, but then something much worse happened. Ron seemed to sag on his broom. All the fight went out of him and he said, "I resign. I am pathetic." "You're not pathetic and you're not resigning," said Harry fiercely, seizing Ron by the front of his robes. "You can save anything when you're on form, it's a mental problem you've got." "You calling me mental?" "Yeah, maybe I am." They glared at each other for a moment, then Ron shook his head wearily. "I know you haven't got any time to find another keeper, so I'll play tomorrow, but if we lose, and we will, I'm taking myself off the team." Nothing Harry said made any difference. He tried boosting Ron's confidence all through dinner, but Ron was too busy being grumpy and surly with Hermione to notice. Harry persisted in the common room that evening, but his assertion that the whole team would be devastated if Ron left was somewhat undermined by the fact that the rest of the team was sitting in a huddle in a distant corner, clearly muttering about Ron and casting him nasty looks. Finally Harry tried getting angry again in the hope of provoking Ron into a defiant, and hopefully goal-saving, attitude, but this strategy did not appear to work any better than encouragement. Ron went to bed as dejected and hopeless as ever. Harry lay awake for a very long time in the darkness. He did not want to lose the upcoming match. Not only was it his first as captain, but he was determined to beat Draco Malfoy at Quidditch even if he could not yet prove his suspicions about him. Yet if Ron played as he had done in the last few practices, their chances of winning were very slim. If only there was something he could do to make Ron pull himself together, make him play at the top of his form, something that would ensure that Ron had a really good day. And the answer came to Harry in one sudden, glorious stroke of inspiration. Breakfast was the usual excitable affair next morning. The Slytherins hissed and booed loudly as every member of the Gryffindor team entered the Great Hall. Harry glanced at the ceiling and saw a clear, pale blue sky, a good omen. The Gryffindor table, a solid mass of red and gold, cheered as Harry and Ron approached. Harry grinned and waved. Ron grimaced weakly and shook his head. "Cheer up, Ron," called Lavender. "I know you'll be brilliant." Ron ignored her. "Tea?" Harry asked him. "Coffee? Pumpkin juice?" "Anything," said Ron glumly, taking a moody bite of toast. A few minutes later Hermione, who had become so tired of Ron's recent unpleasant behavior that she had not come down to breakfast with them, paused on her way up the table. "How are you both feeling?" she asked tentatively, her eyes on the back of Ron's head. "Fine," said Harry, who was concentrating on handing Ron a glass of pumpkin juice. "There you go, Ron. Drink up." Ron had just raised the glass to his lips when Hermione spoke sharply. "Don't drink that, Ron." Both Harry and Ron looked up at her. "Why not?" said Ron. Hermione was now staring at Harry, as though she could not believe her eyes. "You just put something in that drink." "Excuse me," said Harry. "You heard me. I saw you. You just tipped something into Ron's drink. You've got the bottle in your hand right now." "I don't know what you're talking about," said Harry, stowing the little bottle hastily in his pocket. "Ron, I warn you, don't drink it," Hermione said again, alarmed, but Ron picked up the glass, drained it in one gulp, and said, "Stop bossing me around, Hermione." She looked scandalized. Bending low so that only Harry could hear her, she hissed, "You should be expelled for that. I'd never have believed it of you, Harry." "Look who's talking," he whispered back. "Confounded anyone lately." She stormed up the table away from them. Harry watched her go without regret. Hermione had never really understood what a serious business Quidditch was. He then looked around at Ron, who was smacking his lips. "Nearly time," said Harry blithely. The frosty grass crunched underfoot as they strode down to the stadium. "Pretty lucky the weather's this good, eh?" Harry asked Ron. "Yeah," said Ron, who was pale and sick-looking. Ginny and Demelza were already wearing their Quidditch robes and waiting in the changing room. "Conditions look ideal," said Ginny, ignoring Ron. "And guess what? That Slytherin chaser Vasey, he took a bludger in the head yesterday during their practice, and his two saw to play. And even better than that, Malfoy's gone off sick too." "What?" said Harry, wheeling around to stare at her. "He's ill." "What's wrong with him?" "No idea, but it's great for us," said Ginny brightly. "They are playing Harper instead. He's in my year and he's an idiot." Harry smiled back vaguely, but as he pulled on his scarlet robes his mind was far from Quidditch. Malfoy had once before claimed he could not play due to injury, but on that occasion he had made sure the whole match was rescheduled for a time that suited the Slytherins better. Why was he now happy to let a substitute go on? Was he really ill, or was he faking? "Fishy, isn't it?" he said in an undertone to Ron. "Malfoy not playing?" "Lucky, I call it," said Ron, looking slightly more animated. "And Vasey off too. He's their best goal scorer. I didn't fancy hay," he said suddenly, freezing halfway through pulling on his keeper's gloves and staring at Harry. "What? You?" Ron had dropped his voice, he looked both scared and excited. "My drink, my pumpkin juice, you didn't." Harry raised his eyebrows, but said nothing except, "We'll be starting in about 5 minutes, you'd better get your boots on." They walked out onto the pitch to tumultuous roars and boos. One end of the stadium was solid red and gold, the other, a sea of green and silver. Many Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws had taken sides too. Amidst all the yelling and clapping, Harry could distinctly hear the roar of Luna Lovegood's famous lion-topped hat. Harry stepped up to Madam Hooch, the referee, who was standing ready to release the balls from the crate. "Captains shake hands," she said, and Harry had his hand crushed by the new Slytherin captain, Urquhart. "Mount your brooms." On the whistle, 3, 2, 1. The whistle sounded. Harry and the others kicked off hard from the frozen ground, and they were away. Harry soared around the perimeter of the grounds, looking around for the snitch and keeping one eye on Harper, who was zigzagging far below him. Then a voice that was jarringly different to the usual commentators started up. "Well, there they go, and I think we're all surprised to see the team that Potter's put together this year." Many thought, given Ronald Weasley's patchy performance as keeper last year, that he might be off the team, but of course, a close personal friendship with the captain does help. These words were greeted with jeers and applause from the Slytherin end of the pitch. Harry craned around on his broom to look toward the commentator's podium. A tall, skinny blonde boy with an upturned nose was standing there, talking into the magical megaphone that had once been Lee Jordan's. Harry recognized Zacharias Smith, a Hufflepuff player whom he heartily disliked. "Oh, and here comes Slytherin's first attempt on goal. It's Urquhart streaking down the pitch." And Harry's stomach turned over. "Weasley saves it. Well, he's bound to get lucky sometimes, I suppose." "That's right, Smith, he is," muttered Harry, grinning to himself, as he dived amongst the chasers with his eyes searching all around for some hint of the elusive snitch. With half an hour of the game gone, Gryffindor were leading 60 points to 0, Ron having made some truly spectacular saves, some by the very tips of his gloves, and Ginny having scored 4 of Gryffindor's 6 goals. This effectively stopped Zacharias wondering loudly whether the two Weasleys were only there because Harry liked them, and he started on Peeks and Coot instead. "Of course, Coot isn't really the usual build for a beater," said Zacharias loftily. "They've generally got a bit more muscle," hit a bludger at him. Harry called to Coot as he zoomed past, but Coot, grinning broadly, chose to aim the next bludger at Harper instead, who was just passing Harry in the opposite direction. Harry was pleased to hear the dull thunk that meant the bludger had found its mark. It seemed as though Gryffindor could do no wrong. Again and again they scored, and again, at the other end of the pitch, Ron saved goals with apparent ease. He was actually smiling now, and when the crowd greeted a particularly good save with a rousing chorus of the old favorite, "Weasley is our king," he pretended to conduct them from on high. "Thinks he's something special today, doesn't he?" said a snide voice, and Harry was nearly knocked off his broom as Harper collided with him hard and deliberately. "Your blood traitor, pal." Madam Hooch's back was turned, and though Gryffindors below shouted in anger, by the time she looked around, Harper had already sped off. His shoulder aching, Harry raced after him, determined to ram him back. "And I think Harper of Slytherin's seen the snitch," said Zacharias Smith through his megaphone. "Yes, he's certainly seen something Potter hasn't." Smith really was an idiot, thought Harry, hadn't he noticed them collide? But next moment, his stomach seemed to drop out of the sky. Smith was right and Harry was wrong. Harper had not sped upward at random, he had spotted what Harry had not. The snitch was speeding along high above them, glinting brightly against the clear blue sky. Harry accelerated. The wind was whistling in his ears so that it drowned all sound of Smith's commentary, or the crowd, but Harper was still ahead of him, and Gryffindor was only 100 points up. if Harper got there first, Gryffindor had lost. And now Harper was feet from it, his hand outstretched. "Oi, Harper," yelled Harry in desperation. "How much did Malfoy pay you to come on instead of him?" He did not know what made him say it, but Harper did a double take. He fumbled the snitch, let it slip through his fingers, and shot right past it. Harry made a great swipe for the tiny, fluttering ball and caught it. "Yes!" Harry yelled, wheeling around. He hurtled back toward the ground, the snitch held high in his hand. As the crowd realized what had happened, a great shout went up that almost drowned the sound of the whistle that signaled the end of the game. "Ginny, where are you going?" yelled Harry, who had found himself trapped in the midst of a mass mid-air hug with the rest of the team, but Ginny sped right on past them until, with an almighty crash, she collided with the commentator's podium. As the crowd shrieked and laughed, the Gryffindor team landed beside the wreckage of wood under which Zacharias was feebly stirring. Harry heard Ginny saying blithely to an irate Professor McGonagall, "Forgot to break, Professor, sorry." Laughing, Harry broke free of the rest of the team and hugged Ginny, but let go very quickly. Avoiding her gaze, he clapped cheering Ron on the back instead as, all enmity forgotten, the Gryffindor team left the pitch arm in arm, punching the air and waving to their supporters. The atmosphere in the changing room was jubilant. "Party up in the common room," Seamus said, yelled Dean exuberantly. "Come on, Ginny, Demelza." Ron and Harry were the last two in the changing room. They were just about to leave when Hermione entered. She was twisting her Gryffindor scarf in her hands and looked upset, but determined. "I want a word with you, Harry." She took a deep breath. "You shouldn't have done it. You heard Slughorn, it's illegal." "What are you going to do, turn us in?" demanded Ron. "What are you two talking about?" asked Harry, turning away to hang up his robes so that neither of them would see him grinning. "You know perfectly well what we're talking about," said Hermione shrilly. "You spiked Ron's juice with Lucky Potion at breakfast." Felix Felicis. "No, I didn't," said Harry, turning back to face them both. "Yes you did, Harry, and that's why everything went right. There were Slytherin players missing and Ron saved everything." "I didn't put it in," said Harry, grinning broadly. He slipped his hand inside his jacket pocket and drew out the tiny bottle that Hermione had seen in his hand that morning. It was full of golden potion and the cork was still tightly sealed with wax. "I wanted Ron to think I'd done it, so I faked it when I knew you were looking." He looked at Ron. "You saved everything because you felt lucky. You did it all yourself." He pocketed the potion again. "There really wasn't anything in my pumpkin juice," Ron said, astounded. "But the weather's good, and Vasey couldn't play. I honestly haven't been given Lucky Potion." Harry shook his head. Ron gaped at him for a moment, then rounded on Hermione, imitating her voice. "You added Felix Felicis to Ron's juice this morning, that's why he saved everything. See? I can save goals without help, Hermione." "I never said you couldn't, Ron, you thought you'd been given it too." But Ron had already strode past her out of the door with his broomstick over his shoulder. Said Harry into the sudden silence. He had not expected his plan to backfire like this. Shall we go up to the party, then?" "You go," said Hermione, blinking back tears. "I'm sick of Ron at the moment. I don't know what I'm supposed to have done." And she stormed out of the changing room too. Harry walked slowly back up the grounds toward the castle through the crowd, many of whom shouted congratulations at him, but he felt a great sense of letdown. He had been sure that if Ron won the match, he and Hermione would be friends again immediately. He did not see how he could possibly explain to Hermione that what she had done to offend Ron was kiss Victor Crumb, not when the offense had occurred so long ago. Harry could not see Hermione at the Gryffindor celebration party, which was in full swing when he arrived. Renewed cheers and clapping greeted his appearance, and he was soon surrounded by a mob of people congratulating him. What with trying to shake off the Creevy brothers, who wanted a blow-by-blow match analysis, and the large group of girls that encircled him, laughing at his least amusing comments and batting their eyelids, it was some time before he could try and find Ron. At last, he extricated himself from Romilda Vane, who was hinting heavily that she would like to go to Slughorn's Christmas party with him. As he was ducking toward the drinks table, he walked straight into Ginny, Arnold the pygmy puff riding on her shoulder and Crookshanks mewing hopefully at her heels. "Looking for Ron?" she asked, smirking. "He's over there, the filthy hypocrite." Harry looked into the corner she was indicating. There, in full view of the whole room, stood Ron, wrapped so closely around Lavender Brown it was hard to tell whose hands were whose. "It looks like he's eating her face, doesn't it?" said Ginny dispassionately. "But I suppose he's got to refine his technique somehow." "Good game, Harry." She patted him on the arm. Harry felt a swooping sensation in his stomach, but then she walked off to help herself to more butterbeer. Crookshanks trotted after her, his yellow eyes fixed upon Arnold. Harry turned away from Ron, who did not look like he would be surfacing soon, just as the portrait hole was closing. With a sinking feeling, he thought he saw a manet of bushy brown hair whipping out of sight. He darted forward, sidestepped Romilda Vane again, and pushed open the portrait of the fat lady. The corridor outside seemed to be deserted. Hermione. He found her in the first unlocked classroom he tried. She was sitting on the teacher's desk, alone except for a small ring of twittering yellow birds circling her head, which she had clearly just conjured out of midair. Harry could not help admiring her spell work at a time like this. "Oh, hello, Harry," she said in a brittle voice. "I was just practicing." "Yeah, they really good," said Harry. He had no idea what to say to her. He was just wondering whether there was any chance that she had not noticed Ron, that she had merely left the room because the party was a little too rowdy, when she said, in an unnaturally high-pitched voice, "Ron seems to be enjoying the celebrations." Does he?" said Harry. "Don't pretend you didn't see him," said Hermione. "He wasn't exactly hiding it, was." The door behind them burst open. To Harry's horror, Ron came in, laughing, pulling Lavender by the hand. "Oh," he said, drawing up short at the sight of Harry and Hermione. "Oops," said Lavender, and she backed out of the room, giggling. The door swung shut behind her. There was a horrible, swelling, billowing silence. Hermione was staring at Ron, who refused to look at her, but said with an odd mixture of bravado and awkwardness, "Hi, Harry. Wondered where you'd got to." Hermione slid off the desk. The little flock of golden birds continued to twitter in circles around her head, so that she looked like a strange, feathery model of the solar system. "You shouldn't leave Lavender waiting outside," she said quietly. "She'll wonder where you've gone." She walked very slowly and erectly toward the door. Harry glanced at Ron, who was looking relieved that nothing worse had happened. "Apuno," came a shriek from the doorway. Harry spun around to see Hermione pointing her wand at Ron, her expression wild. The little flock of birds was speeding like a hail of fat golden bullets toward Ron, who yelped and covered his face with his hands, but the birds attacked, pecking and clawing at every bit of flesh they could reach. "Morph me," he yelled, but with one last look of vindictive fury, Hermione wrenched open the door and disappeared through it. Harry thought he heard a sob before it slammed. Chapter 15, The Unbreakable Vow. Snow was swirling against the icy windows once more. Christmas was approaching fast. Hagrid had already single-handedly delivered the usual 12 Christmas trees to the Great Hall. Garlands of holly and tinsel had been twisted around the banisters of the stairs. Everlasting candles glowed from inside the helmets of suits of armor, and great bunches of mistletoe had been hung at intervals along the corridors. Large groups of girls tended to converge underneath the mistletoe bunches every time Harry went past, which caused blockages in the corridors. Fortunately, however, Harry's frequent nighttime wanderings had given him an unusually good knowledge of the castle's secret passageways, so that he was often, without too much difficulty, to navigate mistletoe-free routes between classes. Ron, who might once have found the necessity of these detours excuse for jealousy rather than hilarity, simply roared with laughter about it all. Although Harry much preferred this new laughing, joking Ron to the moody, aggressive model he had been enduring for the last few weeks, the improved Ron came at a heavy price. Firstly, Harry had to put up with the frequent presence of Lavender Brown, who seemed to regard any moment that she was not kissing Ron as a moment wasted, and secondly, Harry found himself once more the best friend of two people who seemed unlikely ever to speak to each other again. Ron, whose hands and forearms still bore scratches and cuts from Hermione's bird attack, was taking a defensive and resentful tone. "She can't complain," he told Harry. "She snogged Crumb. So she's found out someone wants to snog me too. Well, it's a free country. I haven't done anything wrong." Harry did not answer, but pretended to be absorbed in the book they were supposed to have read before Charms next morning, Quintessence, a quest. Determined as he was to remain friends with both Ron and Hermione, he was spending a lot of time with his mouth shut tight. "I never promised Hermione anything," Ron mumbled. "I mean, all right. I was going to go to Slughorn's Christmas party with her, but she never said, just as friends. I'm a free agent." Harry turned a page of Quintessence, aware that Ron was watching him. Ron's voice trailed away in mutters, barely audible over the loud crackling of the fire, though Harry thought he caught the words "crumb" and "can't complain" again. Hermione's schedule was so full that Harry could only talk to her properly in the evenings, when Ron was, in any case, so tightly wrapped around Lavender that he did not notice what Harry was doing. Hermione refused to sit in the common room while Ron was there, so Harry generally joined her in the library, which meant that their conversations were held in whispers. "He's at perfect liberty to kiss whomever he likes," said Hermione, while the librarian, Madame Pince, prowled the shelves behind them. "I really couldn't care less." She raised her quill and dotted an I so ferociously that she punctured a hole in her parchment. Harry said nothing. He thought his voice might soon vanish from the lack of use. He bent a little lower over advanced potion making and continued to make notes on everlasting elixirs, occasionally pausing to decipher the prince's useful additions to Libatius Burrage's text. "And incidentally," said Hermione, after a few moments, "you need to be careful." "For the last time," said Harry, speaking in a slightly hoarse tone after 3/4 of an hour's silence, "I am not giving back this book. I've learned more from the half-blood prince than Snape or Slughorn have taught me in. I'm not talking about your stupid so-called prince," said Hermione, giving his book a nasty look as though it had been rude to her. I'm talking about earlier. I went into the girls' bathroom just before I came in here, and there were about a dozen girls in there, including that Romilda Vane, trying to decide how to slip you a love potion. They're all hoping they're going to get you to take them to Slughorn's party, and I all seem to have bought Fred and George's love potions, which I'm afraid to say probably work. Why didn't you confiscate them then? Demanded Harry. It seemed extraordinary that Hermione's mania for upholding the rules could have abandoned her at this crucial juncture. They didn't have the potions with them in the bathroom, said Hermione scornfully. They were just discussing tactics. As I doubt the Half-Blood Prince, she gave the book another scornful look, could dream up an antidote for a dozen different love potions at once. I'd just invite someone to go with you. That'll stop all the others thinking they've still got a chance. It's tomorrow night, they're getting desperate. There isn't anyone I want to invite, mumbled Harry, who was still not trying to think about Ginny any more than he could help, despite the fact that she kept cropping up in his dreams in ways that made him devoutly thankful that Ron could not perform legilimency. Well, just be careful what you drink, because Romilda Vane looked like she meant business, said Hermione grimly. She hitched up the long roll of parchment, which she was writing her arithmancy essay, and continued to scratch away with her quill. Harry watched her with his mind a long way away. Hang on a moment, he said slowly. I thought Filch had banned anything bought at Weasley's Wizard Wheezes. And when has anyone ever paid attention to what Filch has banned? Asked Hermione, still concentrating on her essay. But I thought all the owls were being searched. So how come these girls are able to bring love potions into the school? Fred and George send them disguised as perfumes and cough potions, said Hermione. It's part of their owl order service. You know a lot about it. Hermione gave him the kind of nasty look she had just given his copy of Advanced Potion Making. It was all on the back of the bottles they showed Ginny and me in the summer, she said coldly. I don't go around putting potions in people's drinks. Or pretending to either, which is just as bad. Yeah, well, never mind that, said Harry quickly. The point is, Filch is being fooled, isn't he? These girls are getting stuff into the school disguised as something else. So why couldn't Malfoy have brought the necklace into the school? Oh, Harry, not that again. Come on, why not? Demanded Harry. Look, sighed Hermione, secrecy sensors detect jinxes, curses, and concealment charms, don't they? They're used to find dark magic and dark objects. They'd have picked up a powerful curse, like the one in the necklace, within seconds. But something that's just been put in the wrong bottle wouldn't register, and anyway love potions aren't dark or dangerous, easy for you to say, muttered Harry, thinking of Romilda Vane. So it would be down to Filch to realize it wasn't a cough potion, and he's not a very good wizard. I doubt he can tell one potion from Hermione stopped dead. Harry had heard it too. Somebody had moved close behind them among the dark bookshelves. They waited, and a moment later the vulture-like countenance of Madame Pince appeared around the corner, her sunken cheeks, her skin like parchment, and her long hooked nose illuminated unflatteringly by the lamp she was carrying. The library is now closed, she said. Mind you return anything you have borrowed to the correct. What have you been doing to that book, you depraved boy? It isn't the library's, it's mine, said Harry hastily, snatching his copy of Advanced Potion Making off the table as she lunged at it with a claw-like hand. Despoiled, she hissed. Desecrated, befouled. It's just a book that's been written on, said Harry, tugging it out of her grip. She looked as though she might have a seizure. Hermione, who had hastily packed her things, grabbed Harry by the arm and frog-marched him away. "She'll ban you from the library if you're not careful. Why did you have to bring that stupid book?" "It's not my fault she's barking mad, Hermione. Or do you think she overheard you being rude about Filch? I've always thought there might be something between them." "Oh, ha ha." Enjoying the fact that they could speak normally again, they made their way along the deserted lamplit corridors back to the common room, arguing whether or not Filch and Madame Pince were secretly in love with each other. "Warbles," said Harry to the fat lady, this being the new, festive password. "Same to you," said the fat lady with a roguish grin, and she swung forward to admit them. "Hi, Harry," said Romilda Vane, the moment he had climbed through the portrait hole. "Fancy a gilly water?" Hermione gave him a "what did I tell you" look over her shoulder. "No thanks," said Harry quickly. "I don't like it much." "Well, take these anyway," said Romilda, thrusting a box into his hands. "Chocolate cauldrons, they've got fire whiskey in them. My gran sent them to me, but I don't like them." "Oh right, thanks a lot," said Harry, who could not think what else to say. "Oh, I am just going over here with." He hurried off behind Hermione, his voice tailing away feebly. "Told you," said Hermione succinctly, "sooner you ask someone, sooner they'll all leave you alone and you can," but her face suddenly turned blank. She had just spotted Ron and Lavender, who were intertwined in the same armchair. "Well, good night, Harry," said Hermione, though it was only 7 o'clock in the evening, and she left for the girls' dormitory without another word. Harry went to bed comforting himself that there was only one more day of lessons to struggle through, plus Slughorn's party, after which he and Ron would depart together for the Burrow. It now seemed impossible that Ron and Hermione would make up with each other before the holidays began, but perhaps, somehow, the break would give them time to calm down, think better of their behavior. But his hopes were not high, and they sank still lower after enduring a transfiguration lesson with them both next day. They had just embarked upon the immensely difficult topic of human transfiguration, working in front of mirrors. They were supposed to be changing the color of their own eyebrows. Hermione laughed unkindly at Ron's disastrous first attempt, during which he somehow managed to give himself a spectacular handlebar mustache. Ron retaliated by doing a cruel, but accurate impression of Hermione jumping up and down in her seat every time Professor McGonagall asked a question, which Lavender and Parvati found deeply amusing and which reduced Hermione to the verge of tears again. She raced out of the classroom on the bell, leaving half her things behind. Harry, deciding that her need was greater than Ron's just now, scooped up her remaining possessions and followed her. He finally tracked her down as she emerged from a girl's bathroom on the floor below. She was accompanied by Luna Lovegood, who was patting her vaguely on the back. "Oh, hello, Harry," said Luna. "Did you know one of your eyebrows is bright yellow?" "Hi, Luna." "Hermione, you left your stuff." He held out her books. "Oh, yes," said Hermione in a choked voice, taking her things and turning away quickly to hide the fact she was wiping her eyes with her pencil case. "Thank you, Harry. Well, I'd better get going." And she hurried off, without ever giving Harry any time to offer words of comfort, though admittedly he could not think of any. "She's a bit upset," said Luna. "I thought at first it was Moaning Myrtle in there, but it turned out to be Hermione. She said something about Ron Weasley." "Yeah, they've had a row," said Harry. "He says funny things sometimes, doesn't he?" said Luna as they set off down the corridor together. But he can be a bit unkind. I noticed that last year. I suppose, said Harry. Luna was demonstrating her usual knack of speaking uncomfortable truths. He had never met anyone quite like her. So have you had a good term? Oh, it's been all right, said Luna. A bit lonely without the D, eh? Ginny's been nice, though. She stopped 2 boys in our Transfiguration class calling me loony the other day. How would you like to come to Slughorn's party with me tonight? The words were out of Harry's mouth before he could stop them. He heard himself say them as though it were a stranger speaking. Luna turned her protuberant eyes to him in surprise. Slughorn's party? With you? Yeah, said Harry, we're supposed to bring guests, so I thought you might like. I mean. He was keen to make his intentions perfectly clear. I mean, just as friends, you know. But if you don't want to. He was already half hoping that she didn't want to. Oh no, I'd love to go with you as friends, said Luna, beaming as he had never seen her beam before. Nobody's ever asked me to a party before, as a friend. Is that why you dyed your eyebrow, for the party? Should I do mine too? No, said Harry firmly, that was a mistake. I'll get Hermione to put it right for me. So I'll meet you in the entrance hall at 8 o'clock then. AHA! Screamed a voice from overhead and both of them jumped, unnoticed by either of them. They had just passed underneath Peeves, who was hanging upside down from a chandelier and grinning maliciously at them. Potty asked Loony to go to the party. Potty loves Loony. Potty loves Loony. And he zoomed away cackling and shrieking, Potty loves Loony. Nice to keep these things private, said Harry. And sure enough, in no time at all the whole school seemed to know that Harry Potter was taking Luna Lovegood to Slughorn's party. You could have taken anyone, said Ron in disbelief over dinner. Anyone? And you chose Loony Lovegood. Don't call her that, Ron, snapped Ginny, pausing behind Harry on her way to join friends. I'm really glad you're taking her, Harry, she's so excited. And she moved on down the table to sit with Dean. Harry tried to feel pleased that Ginny was glad he was taking Luna to the party, but could not quite manage it. A long way along the table Hermione was sitting alone, playing with her stew. Harry noticed Ron looking at her furtively. You could say sorry, suggested Harry bluntly. What, and get attacked by another flock of canaries, muttered Ron. What did you have to imitate her for? She laughed at my mustache. So did I. It was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. But Ron did not seem to have heard. Lavender had just arrived with Parvati. Squeezing herself in between Harry and Ron, Lavender flung her arms around Ron's neck. Hi, Harry, said Parvati, who, like Harry, looked faintly embarrassed and bored by the behavior of their 2 friends. Hi, said Harry, how are you? You're staying at Hogwarts, then? I heard your parents wanted you to leave. I managed to talk them out of it for the time being, said Parvati. That Katie thing really freaked them out, but as there hasn't been anything since. Oh, hi, Hermione. Parvati positively beamed. Harry could tell that she was feeling guilty for having laughed at Hermione in Transfiguration. He looked around and saw that Hermione was beaming back, if possible even more brightly. Girls were very strange sometimes. Hi, Parvati, said Hermione, ignoring Ron and Lavender completely. Are you going to Slughorn's party tonight? No invite, said Parvati gloomily. I'd love to go, though. It sounds like it's going to be really good. You're going, aren't you? Yes. I'm meeting Cormac at 8, and there was a noise like a plunger being withdrawn from a blocked sink and Ron's surface. Hermione acted as though she had not seen or heard anything. We're going up to the party together. Cormac, said Parvati. Cormac McLaggen, you mean? That's right, said Hermione sweetly. The one who almost, she put a great deal of emphasis on the word, became Gryffindor keeper. Are you going out with him, then? Asked Parvati, wide-eyed. Oh yes, didn't he you know, said Hermione, with a most Hermione-ish giggle. No, said Parvati, looking positively agog at this piece of gossip. Wow, you like your Quidditch players, don't you? First Crumb, then McLaggen. I like really good Quidditch players, Hermione corrected her, still smiling. Well, see you. Got to go and get ready for the party. She left. At once Lavender and Parvati put their heads together to discuss this new development, with everything they had ever heard about McLaggen, and all they had ever guessed about Hermione. Ron looked strangely blank, and said nothing. Harry was left to ponder in silence the depths to which girls would sink to get revenge. When he arrived in the entrance hall at 8 o'clock that night, he found an unusually large number of girls lurking there, all of whom seemed to be staring at him resentfully as he approached Luna. She was wearing a set of spangled silver robes that were attracting a certain amount of giggles from the onlookers, but otherwise she looked quite nice. Harry was glad, in any case, that she had left off her radish earrings, her butterbeer cork necklace, and her spectrospecs. Hi, he said. Shall we get going then? Oh yes, she said happily. Where is the party? Slughorn's office, said Harry, leading her up the marble staircase away from all the staring and muttering. Did you hear? There's supposed to be a vampire coming. Rufus Scrimger, asked Luna. I what? Said Harry, disconcerted. You mean the Minister of Magic? Yes, he's a vampire, said Luna matter-of-factly. Father wrote a very long article about it when Scrimger first took over from Cornelius Fudge, but he was forced not to publish by somebody from the ministry. Obviously, they didn't want the truth to get out. Harry, who thought it most unlikely that Rufus Scrimger was a vampire, but who was used to Luna repeating her father's bizarre views as though they were fact, did not reply. They were already approaching Slughorn's office, and the sounds of laughter, music, and loud conversation were growing louder with every step they took. Whether it had been built that way, or because he had used magical trickery to make it so, Slughorn's office was much larger than the usual teacher's study. The ceiling and walls had been draped with emerald, crimson and gold hangings, so that it looked as though they were all inside a vast tent. The room was crowded and stuffy, and bathed in the red light cast by an ornate golden lamp dangling from the center of the ceiling in which real fairies were fluttering, each a brilliant speck of light. Loud singing accompanied by what sounded like mandolins issued from a distant corner. A haze of pipe smoke hung over several elderly warlocks deep in conversation, and a number of house elves were negotiating their way squeakily through the forest of knees, obscured by the heavy silver platters of food they were bearing, so that they looked like little roving tables. Harry, boy, boomed Slughorn, almost as soon as Harry and Luna had squeezed in through the door. Come in, so many people I'd like you to meet. Slughorn was wearing a tasseled velvet hat to match his smoking jacket. Gripping Harry's arm so tightly he might have been hoping to disapparate with him, Slughorn led him purposefully into the party. Harry seized Luna's hand and dragged her along with him. Harry, I'd like you to meet Eldred Werple, an old student of mine, author of Blood Brothers, My Life Amongst the Vampires and, of course, his friend Sanguini. Werple, who was a small, stout, bespectacled man, grabbed Harry's hand and shook it enthusiastically. The vampire Sanguini, who was tall and emaciated with dark shadows under his eyes, merely nodded. He looked rather bored. A gaggle of girls was standing close to him, looking curious and excited. Harry Potter, I am simply delighted, said Werple, peering short-sightedly up into Harry's face. I was saying to Professor Slughorn only the other day, where is the biography of Harry Potter for which we have all been waiting? Said Harry, were you? Just as modest as Horace described, said Werple. But seriously, his manner changed. It became suddenly businesslike. I would be delighted to write it myself. People are craving to know more about you, dear boy, craving. If you were prepared to grant me a few interviews, say in 4 or 5 hour sessions, why, we could have the book finished within months. And all with very little effort on your part. I assure you, ask Sanguini here if it isn't quite Sanguini. Stay here, added Werple, suddenly stern, for the vampire had been edging toward the nearby group of girls, a rather hungry look in his eye. Here, have a pasty, said Werple, seizing one from a passing elf and stuffing it into Sanguini's hand before turning his attention back to Harry. My dear boy, the gold you could make, you have no idea. I'm definitely not interested, said Harry firmly, and I've just seen a friend of mine, sorry. He pulled Luna after him into the crowd. He had indeed just seen a long mane of brown hair disappear between what looked like 2 members of the Weird Sisters. Hermione. Hermione. Harry. There you are, thank goodness. Hi, Luna. What's happened to you? Asked Harry, for Hermione looked distinctly disheveled, rather as though she had just fought her way out of a thicket of devil's snare. Oh, I've just escaped. I've just left Cormac, she said. Under the mistletoe, she added in explanation, as Harry continued to look questioningly at her. Serves you right for coming with him, he told her severely. I thought he'd annoy Ron most, said Hermione dispassionately. I debated for a while about Zacharias Smith, but I thought, on the whole you considered Smith, said Harry, revolted. Yes, I did, and I'm starting to wish I'd chosen him. McLaggen makes Grawp look a gentleman. Let's go this way, we'll be able to see him coming, he's so tall. The 3 of them made their way over to the other side of the room, scooping up goblets of mead on the way, realizing too late that Professor Trelawney was standing there alone. Hello, said Luna politely to Professor Trelawney. Good evening, my dear, said Professor Trelawney, focusing upon Luna with some difficulty. Harry could smell cooking sherry again. I haven't seen you in my classes lately. No, I've got Firenze this year, said Luna. Oh, of course, said Professor Trelawney with an angry, drunken titter. Or Dobbin, as I prefer to think of him. You would have thought, would you not, that now I am returned to the school Professor Dumbledore might have got rid of the horse. But no. We share classes. It's an insult, frankly, an insult. Do you know? Professor Trelawney seemed too tipsy to have recognized Harry. Under cover of her furious criticisms of Firenze, Harry drew closer to Hermione and said, Let me get something straight. Are you planning to tell Ron that you interfered at keeper tryouts? Hermione raised her eyebrows. Do you really think I'd stoop that low? Harry looked at her shrewdly. Hermione, if you can ask out McLaggen, there's a difference, said Hermione with dignity. I've got no plans to tell Ron anything about what might, or might not, have happened at keeper tryouts. Good, said Harry fervently. Because he'll just fall apart again, and we'll lose the next match, Quidditch, said Hermione angrily. Is that all boys care about? Cormac hasn't asked me one single question about myself, no. I've just been treated to 100 great saves made by Cormac McLaggen non-stop ever since. Oh no, here he comes. She moved so fast it was as though she had disapparated. One moment she was there, the next, she had squeezed between two guffawing witches and vanished. Seen Hermione? Asked McLaggen, forcing his way through the throng a minute later. No, sorry, said Harry, and he turned quickly to join in Luna's conversation, forgetting for a split second to whom she was talking. Harry Potter, said Professor Trelawney in deep, vibrant tones, noticing him for the first time. Oh, hello, said Harry unenthusiastically. My dear boy, she said in a very carrying whisper. The rumors. The stories. The chosen one. Of course. I have known for a very long time. The omens were never good, Harry, but why have you not returned to divination? For you, of all people, the subject is of the utmost importance. Ah, Sybil, we all think our subject's most important, said a loud voice, and Slughorn appeared at Professor Trelawney's other side, his face very red, his velvet hat a little askew, a glass of mead in one hand and an enormous mince pie in the other. But I don't think I've ever known such a natural at potions, said Slughorn, regarding Harry with a fond, if bloodshot, eye. Instinctive, you know, like his mother. I've only ever taught a few with this kind of ability, I can tell you that. Sybil, why even Severus, and to Harry's horror, Slughorn threw out an arm, and seemed to scoop Snape out of thin air toward them. Stop skulking and come and join us, Severus, hiccuped Slughorn happily. I was just talking about Harry's exceptional potion making. Some credit must go to you, of course, you taught him for 5 years. Trapped, with Slughorn's arm around his shoulders, Snape looked down his hooked nose at Harry, his black eyes narrowed. Funny. I never had the impression that I managed to teach Potter anything at all. Well, then, it's natural ability, shouted Slughorn. You should have seen what he gave me. First lesson, draft of Living Death. Never had a student produce finer on a first attempt. I don't think even you, Severus, really, said Snape quietly, his eyes still boring into Harry, who felt a certain disquiet. The last thing he wanted was for Snape to start investigating the source of his newfound brilliance at potions. Remind me what other subjects you're taking, Harry, asked Slughorn. Defense against the dark arts, charms, transfiguration, herbology. All the subjects required, in short, for an aura, said Snape with the faintest sneer. Yeah, well, that's what I'd like to do, said Harry defiantly. And a great one you'll make too, boomed Slughorn. I don't think you should be an aura, Harry, said Luna unexpectedly. Everybody looked at her. The auras are part of the Rotfang conspiracy. I thought everyone knew that. They are planning to bring down the Ministry of Magic from within using a combination of dark magic and gum disease. Harry inhaled half his mead up his nose as he started to laugh. Really, it had been worth bringing Luna just for this. Emerging from his goblet, coughing, sopping wet, but still grinning, he saw something calculated to raise his spirits even higher. Draco Malfoy, being dragged by the ear toward them by Argus Filch. Professor Slughorn, wheezed Filch, his jowls a-quiver and the maniacal light of mischief detection in his bulging eyes. I discovered this boy lurking in an upstairs corridor. He claims to have been invited to your party, and to have been delayed in setting out. Did you issue him with an invitation? Malfoy pulled himself free of Filch's grip, looking furious. All right, I wasn't invited, he said angrily. I was trying to gatecrash, Happy. No, I'm not, said Filch, a statement at complete odds with the glee on his face. You're in trouble, you are. Didn't the headmaster say that nighttime prowling is out, unless you've got permission, didn't he, eh? That's all right, Argus, that's all right, said Slughorn, waving a hand. It's Christmas, and it's not a crime to want to come to a party. Just this once, we'll forget any punishment, you may stay, Draco. Filch's expression of outraged disappointment was perfectly predictable, but why, Harry wondered, watching him, did Malfoy look almost equally unhappy? And why was Snape looking at Malfoy as though both angry, and, was it possible, a little afraid? But almost before Harry had registered what he had seen, Filch had turned and shuffled away, muttering under his breath. Malfoy had composed his face into a smile and was thanking Slughorn for his generosity, and Snape's face was smoothly inscrutable again. It's nothing, nothing, said Slughorn, waving away Malfoy's thanks. I did know your grandfather, after all. He always spoke very highly of you, sir, said Malfoy quickly. Said you were the best potion maker he'd ever known. Harry stared at Malfoy. It was not the sucking up that intrigued him. He had watched Malfoy do that to Snape for a long time. It was the fact that Malfoy did, after all, look a little ill. This was the first time he had seen Malfoy close up for ages. He now saw that Malfoy had dark shadows under his eyes and a distinctly greyish tinge to his skin. I'd like a word with you, Draco, said Snape suddenly. Now, Severus, said Slughorn, hiccuping again, it's Christmas. Don't be too hard, I'm his head of house, and I shall decide how hard, or otherwise, to be, said Snape curtly. Follow me, Draco. They left, Snape leading the way, Malfoy looking resentful. Harry stood there for a moment, irresolute, then said, I'll be back in a bit, Luna bathroom. All right, she said cheerfully, and he thought he heard her, as he hurried off into the crowd, resume the subject of the Rotfang conspiracy with Professor Trelawney, who seemed sincerely interested. It was easy, once out of the party, to pull his invisibility cloak out of his pocket and throw it over himself, for the corridor was quite deserted. What was more difficult was finding Snape and Malfoy. Harry ran down the corridor, the noise of his feet masked by the music and loud talk still issuing from Slughorn's office behind him. Perhaps Snape had taken Malfoy to his office in the dungeons. Or perhaps he was escorting him back to the Slytherin common room. Harry pressed his ear against door after door as he dashed down the corridor until, with a great jolt of excitement, he crouched down to the keyhole of the last classroom in the corridor, and heard voices. Cannot afford mistakes, Draco, because if you are expelled, I didn't have anything to do with it, all right. I hope you are telling the truth, because it was both clumsy and foolish. Already you are suspected of having a hand in it. Who suspects me? Said Malfoy angrily. For the last time, I didn't do it, okay? That Bell girl must have had an enemy no one knows about. Don't look at me like that. I know what you're doing, I'm not stupid, but it won't work. I can stop you. There was a pause and then Snape said quietly, Aunt Bellatrix has been teaching you occlumency, I see. What thoughts are you trying to conceal from your master, Draco? I'm not trying to conceal anything from him, I just don't want you butting in. Harry pressed his ear still more closely against the keyhole. What had happened to make Malfoy speak to Snape like this? Snape, toward whom he had always shown respect, even liking. So that is why you have been avoiding me this term. You have feared my interference. You realize that, had anybody else failed to come to my office, when I had told them repeatedly to be there, Draco, so put me in detention. Report me to Dumbledore, jeered Malfoy. There was another pause. Then Snape said, You know perfectly well that I do not wish to do either of those things. You'd better stop telling me to come to your office then. Listen to me, said Snape, his voice so low now that Harry had to push his ear very hard against the keyhole to hear. I am trying to help you. I swore to your mother I would protect you. I made the unbreakable vow. Draco, looks like you'll have to break it, then, because I don't need your protection. It's my job. He gave it to me and I'm doing it. I've got a plan and it's going to work. It's just taking a bit longer than I thought it would. What is your plan? It's none of your business. If you tell me what you are trying to do, I can assist you. I have all the assistance I need, thanks, I'm not alone. You were certainly alone tonight, which was foolish in the extreme, wandering the corridors without lookouts or backup. These are elementary mistakes. I would have had Crabbe and Goyle with me if you hadn't put them in detention. Keep your voice down, spat Snape, for Malfoy's voice had risen excitedly. If your friends Crabbe and Goyle intend to pass their defense against the dark arts OWL, this time around, they will need to work a little harder than they are doing at pres. What does it matter? Said Malfoy. Defense against the dark arts, it's all just a joke, isn't it, an act? Like any of us need protecting against the dark arts, it is an act that is crucial to success, Draco, said Snape. Where do you think I would have been all these years, if I had not known how to act? Now listen to me. You are being incautious, wandering around at night, getting yourself caught. And if you are placing your reliance in assistants like Crabbe and Goyle, they're not the only ones. I've got other people on my side, better people. Then why not confide in me, and I know what you're up to. You want to steal my glory. There was another pause, then Snape said coldly, You are speaking like a child. I quite understand that your father's capture and imprisonment has upset you, but Harry had barely a second's warning. He heard Malfoy's footsteps on the other side of the door and flung himself out of the way just as it burst open. Malfoy was striding away down the corridor, past the open door of Slughorn's office, around the distant corner and out of sight. Hardly daring to breathe, Harry remained crouched down as Snape emerged slowly from the classroom. His expression unfathomable, he returned to the party. Harry remained on the floor, hidden beneath the cloak, his mind racing.